開けるんだ開くのさその不思議な扉を登れるんだ登るのさ未来に触れるその心炸裂の富の節消えてゆく皆の命愛してる女性に裏切られ白涙が宇宙にさまよその行方さえも知らぬただただ自由に漂う登れるな登るのさ未来に触れるその心今私の富のさ熱く燃える富のさ正義の証富のさ敵を落とせ富のさ我らの富のさ
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman.
And Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to peer into the delightfully deranged mind of Tomino Yoshiyuki with our TOMINO-THON. This week on the show, we gather all the aura power we muster and go hyper as we go into the second half of Aura Battler Dunbine. Of course, on last week's episode, we covered the history of how Aura Battler Dunbine came to be. We talked about the crazy genre unicorn that the show is, being basically the first fantasy anime of this style ever, and went deep on episodes 1 to 19. For this week's episode, we're finishing off the show, going through episodes 20 to 49, and answering such important questions as, what is Byston Well? How does one go hyper? And can you ever truly go beyond the Todd?
Indeed. Yeah, this is a fascinating stretch of anime. And honestly, is maybe the most conflicted I've ever been on something we've talked about on Japanimation Station, where I think, from episode 20 to the mid-30s is as good as, anything we've watched this season. It's just incredible. There's so much good stuff in the middle stretch of Dunbine as there was in the first stretch. I think when it makes the transition to Upper Earth, those first few episodes are mind-blowingly good, in the same way those episodes 16 to 18 are when his show first goes to Upper Earth. I think the show gets really flattened as that last arc goes along, and I think limps pretty hard to the finish line. I was really struggling to get through this by the end. I think this show gets... It was a bummer for me because I was loving this show, and then I found myself increasingly disinterested as the show kind of flattens out all the stuff that made it interesting. There's sparks of great stuff, but it's a weird one where, I feel very conflicted coming into this episode and not sure how I feel about a lot of it.
It's just, yeah, so that is a very common opinion, but I actually say that I disagree with it. I actually really love the home stretch of this show. I definitely understand. I think there are definitely issues with it. As it has pacing issues and it gets repetitive in places, but also there were things I found about what it does with the story, and just some sort of nuts and bolts stuff of the action and the sort of tactics and strategy that I really actually loved the whole home stretch of the show. While also recognizing that it has some issues and it is obviously a big kind of diversion from the structure that the show had up to that point.
Yeah, just to be clear and cut this off right away, my complaint is not that it goes back to Upper Earth. I've seen that complaint before from people, and that just the fact that it leaves Byston Well, that is not my complaint. My complaint is that I think, honestly, it's the exact same problem I think Zabungle has in its last third, which is that I think Tomino... I know this is going to sound weird because the ending is as ruthless as anything Tomino's ever done, but I think there's no teeth to the show for a long time, where, the number of times you have to watch the Gaia Gring get fucking nuked and nothing happened to it, and then everyone goes, okay, then we're done battling for today. We'll wait until the next episode to try again, drove me a little insane. And that's more my complaint, is the structure and the repetition and the flatness of it, more than the change in setting. Because my favorite moments in that home stretch are like, oh my God, Ciela Lapana is having a full-on head of state meeting with Queen Elizabeth II,
yes,
where she agrees to help nuke the Gaea Ring. This is amazing. This show is fucking nuts. And stuff like that I still love. So, you know, I want to be nuanced about where my complaints are and aren't, because I don't think, if anyone tells you it's as simple as leaving Byston Well is the problem, I don't think that's the problem. I think there's other things going on here.
Yeah, for me, I think the thing where, I felt something very different from the home stretch of the show than Zabungle, where I think it does have some of the stuff of obviously it does too often have them beat the Gaea Ring and then it sort of limps on to fight another day. Or for me, the one that I was more annoyed by is the number of times that show defeats the Black Knight, whoever he might be.
Yes.
Who knows? And he goes flying off in his little scooter. It does do that too often, but I do think there is a distinct difference between what this show does and what happens with Zabungle, just in the sense of, I think, the nature of the repetition, the way in which the conflict stretches out, becomes prolonged, just takes more and more from everybody involved, feels like more of a dramatic choice here than in Zabungle. It felt like spinning wheels, where Sho and Marvel and Sheila and our characters become more and more desperate. More and more of them is being taken from this conflict. And there's something in that I found, and I think the nature of Aura Battler Dunbine, which we'll get into kind of my read of, I think it very much is a show about Tomino reflecting on the Cold War and and it shows him shifting his kind of interests from looking back at World War II to looking at what's going on contemporaneously, which obviously is what we'll see continue through Zeta Gundam. And I do think even with it having, I think, some very clear issues in doing it too often, it has, I think, much more intent with what it's trying to do there than the whole trying to get Elchi back stretch of Zabungle. And so that's the stuff, and we'll obviously get into it in depth, but that's the stuff I really liked about the ending.
Well, there we go. Yeah, and it's, it is a show that even as we near the parts where that I was not fully on board, you would have stuff like the Paris is Burning episode.
Yeah.
Not the movie about the New York drag scene, the episode where Paris is literally on fire in the movie, or in the TV show. That one is, virtuosic. The Beyond the Todd episode that you already mentioned, not just a great episode title, a great episode. As Todd Guinness becomes, I will put my foot down, the best character on this show, kind of easily to me. It's an amazing turnaround that I already liked him in part one, but oh my God, they do such a, that's the character I feel like they have the best read on through the end. It's amazing. So again, it's never a show where I think there's a lack of good things going on, and I'm very interested to talk about it here. So
yes,
there we go.
Well, obviously, with the the second half of the show, or really that kind of last third being as divisive as it is, there are production sort of reasons behind this of where the show goes. So let's get into that. These are all notes that I really wrote up last time around. I was like, I can't possibly put these in because they're all it's all dealing with stuff we were not going to cover in that episode. So just as a recap of some of the basic stuff we talked about last episode, just to give some of the context of what happens with the changes. So Aura Battler Dunbine went through several phases of changes in its production. One of the big ones we talked about last time was Tomino, after making that first episode, which he wrote, storyboarded, and directed, was dissatisfied with the results of that first episode, feeling that he had kind of really only shown the setting and hadn't really engaged with the drama. They regretted not having Sho get thrown into the conflict immediately and stuff like that. He started to rejigger the structure of the show that he had originally come up with. The biggest one being he took the original idea of Sho going to Upper Earth, which would have happened near the ending, and brought it all the way up to episode 17, creating the stretch of episodes that we ended our last podcast on. The show was also struggling commercially. That is a different conversation than Tomino making some of the choices I just said. The struggling commercially, right, it was having issues with the merchandising. Things like the kind of Beetle-like designs of the Aura Battlers was not resonating with their younger demographic they were aiming for. And so Clover, the ill-fated sponsor of many Tomino projects, began asking for changes to the show. Clover itself goes bankrupt, as we talked about last time, partway through the production of the show. And so the changes that Clover started asking for did not manifest in the show until after Clover no longer existed, which is, pouring out for those guys. So I've got to feel bad for them. Of course, we talked about Bandai takes over the main sponsor duties when Clover goes under, and then Tomy is the company that takes on the merchandising. However, again, the overall direction of the second half of the show, basically cours 3 and 4, was significantly influenced by the demands of Clover, which ended up being posthumous demands for a company that no longer existed. But of course, those changes were well underway regardless. One of those big changes is, of course, we have a shift to the main mech, and so we get, similar to what happened with Zabungle, we have a new main mecha for show to pilot, which is the Bilbine, or I like to call it the Billabine. There's something about, I feel like in Japanese it's got that syllable, and I like that syllable, but its standard remediation is just the Bilbine, so I will call it that.
Mr. William Bine is its full Christian name, Sean.
Yes, Will Bine, our good friend. It was designed by Kogawa Tominori, who is also the character designer, of course, who's been working on Tomino stuff since Daitarn 3. He was not originally a mecha designer for this show. That was Miyatake Kazutaka. But as we talked about last time, he left. He was part of Studio Nue, and they were working on Orgus at this point. And so Kogawa took over duties along with a couple of other people. But he designed the Bilbine. The Bilbine's design intentionally de-emphasizes the insectoid elements, like the motif for the Bilbine is all avian. It's like bird stuff. Obviously, it still has insectoid pieces because it's still meant to fit in with the show. But again, it is trying to have like eagle talons. It's got like the eagle beak kind of stuff on it. And it also introduced the transformation gimmick where it turns into the wing caliber flying mode, very similar to what will happen with the Zeta Gundam and the Elgine Mark II. There's a lot of, we're turning into flying modes. Obviously, Macross is out around this time. So this is kind of a big thing in mech at this point. That wing caliber thing obviously was intended as a gimmick for the toy that Clover wanted to make, and then Clover didn't exist, and so Tomy made it instead. Another change that was made to the show...
Let's pause here.
Okay, yeah.
Do we like the Bilbine? This is a legitimate question.
The Bilbine.
Okay. I don't dislike the Bilbine. I think it's like a good design in a vacuum. I think it frequently looks very good in motion. I think particularly its coloring works really well opposite like the backgrounds when they have especially when you're still in Byston Well. This is kind of ironic because the Bilbine is intentionally kind of out of place when it's introduced, but I think it looks best in Byston Well when you have the like rich sunsets and stuff that you get in that stretch of the show. I think it looks a little more plain when a lot of the last stretch of the show is just in the ocean kind of, and I think it looks less interesting there. But I do have to like, whenever it cuts to a different mech like the Dunbine, I like those more. Like, I do like that insectoid thing is so cool that the Bilbine does feel like a little more generic to me, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I think I do like the design of the Dunbine more. I think with the Bilbine, the thing I like is what it does with the action, where it's just got like, it has so many more things it can do, regardless of, like, it can turn into the wing caliber mode, but it's got like the cannons on the shoulder. It has the rifle that has like the aura beam javelin. And then of course he has his regular aura sword. And then the talons as well are a lot more prominent. And so I think like the animators and the storyboarders do a really good job of like making use of the Bilbine as a like a weapon that kind of allows the action to do things it couldn't do before. But I still prefer the Dunbine's overall look. I do think it's interesting that, the show in those last 2 episodes does a thing where you have like the night camouflage version of it where they change the coloring. So it's got that kind of black and purple look, which is a thing you can unlock in Super Robot Wars Alpha, which at that point I was like, what the fuck? Why do you have a different color Bilbine? But I'm
gonna be honest, I was fully confused by that, and I didn't quite get where its colors went. So there we go. I don't know if I like missed something big, but I
think they mention it very briefly in passing, because the idea is that it is camouflaged to blend in with this like night mission. But of course, the mission takes so long that it ends up in the day in the last episode.
I think it actually hurts the action there because it makes it less distinctive in motion, and it made some of that harder to follow. It's like. I also think, like you can see in the show, the Dunbine gets a much bigger death scene than the Bilbine. Like, the Dunbine gets, like, a really epic... It's also where Marvel dies, but it's like, It gets a proper, like, Viking funeral final scene. And, like, you can tell the show still really loves the Dunbine, the way it uses it throughout the entire second half,
And they've got that one shot that they animated of the profile shot of the Dunbine taking off.
Yeah, it's in the theme song, and
Yes.
it's... Yeah.
They're like, it's such a great pice of animation. Like, we're holding on to this for dear life. We're going to use this every chance we can get. Yeah. Obviously, also for me, part of my I can't separate entirely my feelings in the Bilbine here from my feelings in using it in Super Robot Wars Y. Like, sure. I just have an affection of it's the thing that I used in that game for like 100 hours. It's ridiculously good in that game. The animations that it has are like ridiculously fucking cool. So it's hard for me to sort of like separate out. How do I feel about the Bilbine in extraneous media versus just its application here? Because I was very well familiar with it long before it popped up in the show.
Yeah, this is going to sound like a weird comparison, but I think the Bilbine reminds me a lot of the design of the PS5, where it looks less like a traditional console/mech than like something Nike would design for a sneaker. And like that can be kind of cool, but then sometimes you'll show me like, a picture of the original PS1 or something, and I go, yeah, man, consoles used to look good. And so that's kind of, I have a little of two minds on it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm pro Bilbine.
Okay.
I like Mr. William Bine. He's a good friend. But obviously it is an intentional diversion from the designs of the show. I mean, my favorite Aura Battler in the show is the Virus, which is the one that Todd comes back in that has the two big axes. That thing's fucking cool.
That thing is the best. The Leprechaun, which we also get in the middle stretch here, is fantastic. That one is, and you get characters yelling Leprechaun over and over, and it's great.
Anyways, let's get back to some of the other changes that were made. So one of the other big changes was there was a planned character. Sheila Lapana was supposed to be the king of the country of Na, who was going to be this kind of wizened old sage-like figure who would assist Sho. And then they completely rejiggered that character to become the Sheila Lapana we know, who is a beautiful queen, right? And has very clearly Bishoujo design elements. Bishoujo, of course, being like beautiful girl. Just note that at this point, we're in early 1984. And like early magical girl anime, early anime using Bishoujo designs has become a thing. Like Miki Momo is out at this point. And so that kind of design philosophy has become very popular. And I think like Sheila, you look at her and very clearly compared to like Marvel's character design, compared to Goralia, compared to Keen, compared to Ella, like there's a very clear, she is like designed in this other kind of template, which has become very popular at this point. Along with Sheila, they also introduce Elfino directly in the show, who is the Mi Ferrario, the pink one that is featured in the ending theme. She was not originally designed to be a character. She was just a thing in the ending theme of the show, as kind of an aesthetic piece. But as part of the Sheila Lapana thing, they decided to bring her into the actual text of the show, along with Belle, the other Mi Ferrario.
And I don't know if this was a conscious change. You don't have it listed on here, Sean. But also in the second half, those last two cours, the Mi Ferrario become much more prominent comic relief in the series is something. And I like that. I actually think it's done really well. The only one that kind of raised my eyebrow was in the final episode. You have a full-on fourth wall break where I think it's not Elle, it's Belle.
It's Belle.
Is this because it's the last episode? And considering we're in full-on Idion Be Invoked territory, I don't think the fourth wall break is particularly appropriate in that episode. But other than that, like particularly I think Cham, letting her be funny and then letting her bounce off of Elle and Belle, I like that levity, and I think it's something I appreciated in most episodes. It's like, it feels like a natural place to put in some humor, in the same way like the Kika Cats and Let's do in Gundam or something like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And particularly, I think Cham just like really kind of comes even more into her own as a character in the second half. She obviously gets her like kind of
little outfit
where she has where she has first she gets like a little dress and then she gets her battle uniform, which to me that's just what she looks like, because that's what she looks like in Super Robot Wars. So like I was like, oh, finally she has her goofy little helmet and all this shit, and she's in the cockpit with Sho helping him fight, which is the context in which I understood that character for a long time.
There's really no equivalent to this in any of his Gundam shows, but I like Tomino doing, get our little guys in little space suits. We got that in Idion with the little, like, squirrel guy got in his own little space suit. We've got that here. Okay, to be fair, in Victory Gundam, you do have the episode where Flanders goes in a space suit. Flanders the dog, so there's that.
Yeah, both Flanders the dog and Carlman the baby also. I mean, he's not in a baby-sized spacesuit, but he does go into a spacesuit.
Yeah, but you know what? That's a one-way Victory Gundam would have been better if they made a baby-sized and a dog-sized spacesuit for those two, because I love it. I love it when and he doesn't do this in his comedy shows. He does this in the really serious ones, which is what's so funny.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, the biggest change that happens is that the setting shifts back to Upper Earth for the whole last core of the show, and the style of action also shifts. So there's part of the kind of demand from Clover's side was to have more action on a bigger scale. And to kind of move away from some of the more obscure fantasy stuff that's in Byston Well, to have a show that would be more accessible. Whether or not the show ends up being actually more accessible because of those changes is highly questionable to me, because it's still very much a Tomino show, and the nature of the action is bigger and more elaborate, but it's still very Tomino-like. So it's, I don't think it would have mattered for Clover's purposes, those shifts in the nature of the war to attrition with big standing armies versus the kind of smaller skirmishes and the Sengoku style thing that was going on. They're both very Tomino. Both of them are for people who like Tomino shit.
Yeah, I think any time you ask Tomino to make something more accessible, it's akin to wishing on a monkey's paw and watching the finger curl, because it will find a way to technically do what you asked for, but in a way that does not give you what you wanted.
Yes, exactly. Because it never becomes just to sort of turn your brain off. It's just you're seeing things explode. Like, it's never really that. These changes can be seen very clearly taking shape in the show at the beginning of the third core. Episode 27, Queen of the Red Tempest, changes the opening narration to one which foreshadows the eventual plot twist of the world rejecting the Aura machines. That's also the episode that introduces the new design for Sheila, and Alfino is directing the story. And at the end of that episode, they tease the existence of the Bilbine. And then in episode 29, Arrival of the Bilbine, that's when fully they change the opening animation to include the new characters and the new villains and stuff like that have been introduced. So it's a clear, we know that this is the nature of how these productions work anyways, but obviously they're built around these kind of core structures, and so as soon as you enter the third core is where that starts happening, even though it's not like 12 to 13 episodes later that the thing about rejecting the Aura machines actually happens. That is set in stone in the opening narration well before it does, which made me very excited, because again, from Super Robot Wars, my perspective of Dunbine, everything in Super Robot Wars Y is just that last stretch. It's all the stuff from, the opening moment when Sho gets introduced into that game is Yakuba Aon has banished the Aura machines to Upper Earth, which is how he intersects with all the other characters in the game. And so as soon as these, and the world rejected the Aura machines, I'm like, it's the fucking Simpsons gif where I was like, I know that. That's the thing I know. Yes, I know this. This is a thing. That was in the video game I played.
Yeah, man, can you imagine if this show, they got, booted up to Upper Earth and then they're in the middle of a totally different mecha show? That'd be fucking wild. I would actually watch that version of Dunbine. That'd be pretty great. Yes,
and fucking Hiro Yui is there and he's fighting Lelouch from Code Geass. You're like, what the fuck is even happening? It's like, oh my god.
That would probably be a harder thing to do, work the rights out for making an anime based on Super Robot Wars, even than making the games, but I would watch it. That sounds great.
Yes. It'd be amazing. All right, so this, as we will demonstrate, I'm sure, on this podcast, this second half of the show, particularly that last core, the Upper Earth arc, I guess we'll call it, is divisive amongst fans. It's loved by some, hated or disliked by others, and I'm glad that we have people that represent both sides of that perspective.
I don't hate it. I will say, I do not hate it. I dislike in some ways, but I never hate.
Yes. And it's not uncommon to see people blame that last core on the show and the reason why they don't like it for Clover meddling with the show. However, I do think it's important to keep in mind that Tomino himself was not critical of these changes, and I honestly don't know if the show ended up all that much different from what it would have been regardless. So he acknowledged that the change in action to a large-scale conflict of attrition was a result of demands from the sponsor, but he stated about the shift to going to Upper Earth and the Upper Earth arc as, quote, I believe it was a fitting punctuation point for the TV series, so I have no ill feelings about it at all. I feel we were able to show the relationship between Byston Well and Upper Earth. And if Tomino felt bad about that and he didn't like the changes and didn't want to do them, he would not be shy about saying that. Right. So, I'm sure that there are specific elements of the show that ended up being different, but I don't think the show itself honestly probably ended up being that much different from what it would have become regardless of that stuff with Clover. Sure, maybe the Bilbine wouldn't be there and there'd be some other Aura machine, there'd be some changes, but I don't think the overall direction of the show probably shifted all that much.
Yeah, and I my problem with it is not the direction. The idea that this ends on Upper Earth is the right, like, it is. It's like very clearly where this has to go. I think it's thematically where it wants to go. It's like when you get to the ending and you learn Cham is the last survivor and she told the story, and the narrator is the guy on the battleship, and he's telling us the story as the me Ferrario who was Cham told. Like, that's very clear that was always the ending. I think even you, from what I'm hearing, Sean, would agree. It happens too early, and I think there's too many episodes where they have to spin their wheels a little bit, but that's different than it being the wrong narrative move entirely. Is that fair?
Yes. Like, I think Dunbine would have benefited from the thing that happened to Mobile Suit Gundam, where it just had less episodes to do what it was trying to do.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, Tomino at this point has only done one show that went for 4 cours, and that was Zabungle, another show that suffered from this problem. And I think it just turns out it's fucking hard to make a TV show that goes for 50 to 52 episodes in 1 year with a new episode basically every week, and to have that all be paced perfectly and everything and not hit these kind of doldrums. I just think that's incredibly hard to do. Every other anime from this period I have watched suffers from that, like Bottoms very much has this exact problem. In fact, Bottoms has this problem more because it has it in multiple arcs where it ends up repeating itself too often. And so I think that the Clover thing and the fact that there's this kind of relative drama with the sponsor, which happens with all of these TV shows. There's not a one of these anime that is totally immune from drama involving the sponsor. Like Tomino was handed down the design of the Ideon from on high and had to be like, how do I turn this into a Lovecraftian monster? I don't know. Let me give it a shot. So I think like people like to scapegoat that stuff. And I think it oftentimes when I have read criticism when I was putting together my notes, because I knew that this section was divisive. But when I read people's complaints, it feels like the criticism gets really flattened out by this scapegoat of, oh, the sponsor said this thing and that made the show bad. And I think that's just like taking agency away from Tomino, who is a creator who has flaws. Like, I think he needed to learn how to make a show that went 50 episodes and was paced really well, because he has not done it yet. We will see. I don't know Heavy Metal Elgheim, but I think when we get to Zeta Gundam, has a couple of little kind of rocky points, like when Rosemi comes back, but overall avoids this problem, generally speaking.
Yes.
And so I think we're just seeing him continuing to develop as a creator, dealing with a problem he never really had before, which is, I actually have an entire final core to wrap this shit up, and I don't have to figure out how to jam it into 5 episodes or whatever, is a thing that he's not used to doing yet.
Right. It's like, it's an uncomfortable but like very real truth that Mobile Suit Gundam and Space Runaway Ideon are better shows, or at least in Ideon's case, better overall things when you add the movie on, because they were canceled. Like,
yes.
Gundam's ending is in part as good as it is because they had to compress it, and Ideon, the TV show is obviously truncated, but when you then get to watch Be Invoked, that's a better version than what they were going to be able to make for TV, so hey, there we go. And yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, like, whether you like the Upper Earth section or whether you are cold on it, I think we could all agree the animating tension of that last stretch of episodes, the last, like, core, is telling this story versus the amount of time they have to tell it. And I think it is the thing that makes for both where it works in what you were saying, Sean, of like maybe the fatigue that sets in on the characters being mirrored in the audience, but also where it doesn't work. Like the Black Knight kind of gets really flattened as a character, Burn Bunnings, because of how many times he just fails and comes back, right?
Yes, it gets the Saturday morning cartoon problem of like, you can't kill the bad guy because you need him for more episodes, but you also need to have the fight every episode, and you need to have some kind of conclusion to that fight, and so that conclusion is going to come in the form of, I lop off this part of your ore machine, it explodes, and you ride off in your scooter to live another day. And yeah, it just has too many episodes to do the story that it's trying to do. But I think the thing with like what you're saying, Jonathan, of like, it's clear that it was always going to be on Upper Earth and that's what the conclusion of the show is going to be, is very literally true, because the earliest ending we know planned for the show, which goes all the way back to in the pre-production phase before even episode 1 was written, Tomino had an outlined ending, which that page is in the museum book I have, which talks about, it basically has like his outline of what the ending was going to be, which is both very similar, although there's a couple of key elements that I think are interesting in how they're different. So the original like kind of outlined ending he had read like this: Shozama travels the Aura Road in the Dunbine and returns home to Japan. However, that journey sapped all of Sho's life energy, and so he perishes. So Sho was always, this was always going to be a kill 'em all Tomino show. He had the bloodlust in him. There wasn't enough death in Zabungle. He's like, I gotta kill these motherfuckers. So Chamfao was left behind alone in Tokyo. Chamfao tried to convey to the people of Upper Earth the stories of the days Shozama led in Byston Well. However, the people of Upper Earth, looking at this winged creature, simply stared in fear as though she were some sort of alien. And so obviously the plan always was to have Sho die in Upper Earth, have the whole thing of like, this is the story as the me Ferrario tell it, be the kind of like circle point for the narrative. But I do find it really interesting that the original planned ending was to have it be this unsettling, like, but nobody listened to her thing, rather than what we do get, which is the people who are there are kind of, and we'll talk about, I think there's some really interesting similarities to Char's counterattack in a lot of the home stretch here. But the people who witness this miracle, they all converge upon her. She tells it to them in one night, and then she flies away and disappears in the moonlight. Is like a much more hopeful ending than this one. Sounds like fucking depressing as shit. It's like we went through all this stuff, everyone died, Cham's trying to tell everyone the story, and everyone just looks at her like she's some sort of monster. Because at this original outline stage, this would have been the first time and the only time we returned to Upper Earth. And obviously that all that changed multiple times over the production when it went earlier and earlier and earlier. But this was always his vision: was Sho dies, he ends up back on Upper Earth when he's dead, and Cham tells the story, and it's the story as the me Ferrario tell it.
Yeah. And again, I mean, it seems like also the change in direction is embedded by the time you get the opening narration in episode 1, that this is going to be a different kind of circularity in the storytelling. So that, again, none of that feels like it's out of place in that sense.
Yes. The ultimate ending that we did get, though, went through one very like distinct change, which is originally Tomino had the ending was going to portray explicitly the character's souls returning to Byston Well and resurrecting as me Ferrario as part of that, showing the reincarnation cycle that Byston Well we know is supposed to be a part of. And they went so far as I understand it, for that section to actually have started animation. But then Tomino, when he looked at like a rough of the episode, ultimately felt that ending direction was too similar to the ending of Space Reno Ideon, and so he cut it out of the final cut of the episode. I don't believe that whatever rough version of it exists anywhere anymore. But that was like the original idea, was to go full on sort of Ideon style. I assume show everyone's bodies like transform into me Ferrari or however you would have depicted it. Whereas it's more left to implication in the final cut, where Sho's last word is "purify us," which he shouts out to Sheila, and then everyone disappears in a ball of light. And so I think you're still meant to kind of understand that is what is happening. Maybe not the me Ferrario bit, but he doesn't show it explicitly in the final cut of the episode.
I'm kind of split on this one, because I don't know if the way this is described, and we don't have the actual footage, so I don't know what it would have looked like. I don't know if that would have been the way to do it. I think some kind of return to Byston Well and some slightly more concrete version of that relationship between Earth as the land of the living and Byston Well as the land of the soul. Some version of that I would have liked to have seen. I understand the anxiety about the similarity to Ideon, although, to be fair, that's all I was thinking throughout the final 2 episodes, because it's a very, very similar ending overall, in a way that I don't think it would have been more problematic to have done this. It's already a very similar ending.
Yeah, I suspect that it was Tomino having a moment of like, oh, fuck. I kind of ended up... So, and it's not like Dunbine and Ideon are the same show. They are not at all. But they end up in very similar places, I think, kind of looking at two different things, where I think Dunbine is more about the kind of contemporaneous political moment and expressing that through metaphor, whereas Ideon feels like a much bigger kind of philosophical point he's trying to make. But yeah, I don't know if I think the ending would be better if they included it. I don't know if it's worse with it cut out. Like, this is one of the places where me knowing a bunch of lore from having played Super Robot Wars makes it hard for me to know, because I feel like I read very clearly the Byston Well resurrection and all that stuff, but I already knew all that stuff about it. So it's like I'm bringing in a lot of outside knowledge that probably is like really like enhancing my reading of like little pieces of exposition. That if you're a first-time viewer, don't have that extra information, probably makes it not have as like clear an intent or impact.
Yeah.
But the one thing I want to end our little history discussion on, partially because I watched this last night. As we discussed last week, Dunbine, had a rocky road on initial airing, particularly that merchandising sales, but its success in later life is unquestionable, right? It's one of those properties, not certainly at the level of Gundam, but that Sunrise keeps bringing out for like something, or like you get new Aura Battler merchandise constantly. And in fact, even at the time in the 1980s, Sunrise went so far as to make a series of OVAs in 1988. So 4 years after the show finished airing, and after things like Dragon Quest and other early fantasy anime were coming out, you have like Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind has been released at this point in the movie. So clearly, like, I think they saw that the market for the fantasy thing was starting to become a thing. And so they made these OVAs. It's kind of an interesting thing. Basically, what the OVAs are is there's a 3-episode compilation of the TV series alongside a 3-episode OVA pseudo-sequel called The New Story of Aura Battler Dunbine, with that pseudo-sequel being set entirely in the world of Byston Well, set 700 years after the events of the TV show. These OVAs were split across 3 releases. Each release had one part of the compilation and one part of the new OVA series. Now, we're not covering them on the podcast because Tomino was not really involved. Like, he didn't edit the compilation together. He certainly didn't direct the OVA. The OVA is not at all in Tomino's style. But if people are interested, you can seek them out. They do not exist in the form of official English releases, so you gotta torrent them if you want to watch them with English subtitles. I did watch the New Story of Aura Battler Dunbine last night out of curiosity, also partially because characters from that are also in the Super Robot Wars Y game. And it is pretty interesting. It's very much one of those OVAs where if you want to see a good story that's well told with great characters, it's not going to be that. If you want to see something with like ridiculously lavish production style and like beautiful art, then you want to watch it. I think it is definitely worth a watch just for how gorgeous the animation is. The premise is pretty fascinating, where basically the idea is that Shot Weapon has been cursed in death and his soul returning to Byston Well to basically live this horrible immortal existence where he can't die. He's kind of removed from the cycle of reincarnation. So he becomes like basically fucking Mum-Ra from the Thundercats, where he's like this mummy dude who's trying to find some way to open the Aura Road so he can die. And then the main character is a character named Shion Zama, who they don't explicitly tell you, but it's very clear through implication that he is meant to be Sho's soul in the cycle of reincarnation. It's the same voice actor. He's got the same scar on the chin. And at this point, aura machines are this like ancient thing, because obviously they're all meant to have been destroyed or banished. And so there are only a couple of aura machines that still exist, but they're buried deep under the earth, and they're like ancient artifacts. And the cool thing with the aura machines is that they're animated. Well, they're animated very infrequently. They mostly exist in the production on the background layer because they're like they're huge and they're really highly detailed, and they mostly move through like close-ups of specific parts of them that are animated by rotating or moving the background layer in some way. It's like a pretty interesting technique to get these like very massive, super hyper detailed, fucked up looking aura machines. So I think it's well worth a watch just to appreciate the production and the art and the kind of concept of how they're playing in the world of Dunbine, because it's very clear that animators and writers and stuff are much more comfortable with this fantasy genre and style at this point. There's a lot of Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind in it aesthetically. But if you want to watch something that is connected to Tomino's style at all, it is not. Like, we would have nothing to talk about it in connection to Tomino, because it is just not at all in his wheelhouse of the kind of thing he would have made.
Which is fine. That, on its own is not a problem. And Dunbine does feel like, as Tomino-ish as it is, you could have a lot of other people play in this sandbox. And I can see a lot of other voices doing well in this, even if they're very different than Tomino's. And I have not watched this OVA, so I can't comment on it directly, but that sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, it's definitely, if you like Dunbine and specifically like the world of Byston Well and like the art of it, it's got some pretty cool shit in it. Although it also has that OVA thing of like every other scene in it is like shamelessly ripping off some famous scene from some movie you've watched. Like there is they just totally rip off like the trash compactor scene from Star Wars. And if you've watched OVAs from the late 80s or early 90s, you will be familiar with some of like the things they do in order to make these very quick kind of stories with very beautiful art. So if you are interested in those, well worth seeking out, but certainly not like an essential text in the world of Dunbine or anything that you have to go see.
It's kind of funny on that point. I mean, the number of OVAs that are influenced by Top Gun, like Gunbuster and, Gundam 0083, Stardust Memory, and all of those. And I was thinking while watching in the later stretch of Aura Battler Dunbine, you have the scenes on the aircraft carrier, and they're really accurate in how they show, like, the planes landing and the strips come out to like help them stop and like stop their momentum and all of that stuff. And I'm like, man, this is really, I wonder if this was Top Gun. And then I went and remembered, no, this is a pre-Top Gun anime doing aircraft carrier stuff. I don't know if I've ever seen that. And it's accurate because Tomino is a perfectionist on this stuff. But I don't think that kind of imagery had a ton of purchase in anime before Top Gun made it very mainstream in anime.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, we talked about on last week's episode that one of the things that was very rare that they did is that they went to, like a team of people went to a JASDF bases and they went to 2 different bases and got like real world reference material. Now, I don't know enough about jet fighters and battle cruisers and shit like that to know if the ones that are part of like the pseudo-American Navy at the end are different models or whatever. They had different kind of reference footage or materials for those than what they would have had at those Air Force bases in Japan. But the point being that like there was an intent to try to make those things as realistic as possible. And absolutely, this is like very, very early for that kind of depiction in anime, because that would have still been in 1983.
Yeah. It's just something that I noticed that was like, oh man, this is another way this show feels out of time in some ways.
Yes. Dunbine, it's a strange beast from beginning to end. It is like this, as we talked about last time, that the setting assistant on the show who later became an anime writer describing it as like this dragon. That's a show that was 2 steps ahead of time, but diagonally, I think very much proves to be true all the way to the show's conclusion.
Absolutely. So, I mean, where do you want to go now? Obviously, I feel like we're itching to get to the juicy stuff at the end. But then there is, I almost wish we were doing this as 3 separate podcasts because there is that middle, this really is a 3-part show. You have the part that we did in our last episode of Japanimation Station, where everything up through episode 19 of show, learning about Byston Well, briefly leaving, coming back, all of that. Then you have everything up to when Jacoba Aon sends them up to Upper Earth. And that middle stretch, I don't want to overlook because it is virtuosic shit, consistently edge of your seat, binging the crap out of this. It's got some of the best action cuts in Tomino's filmography. So much good stuff in that middle stretch that I don't want to underserve here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can just jump in there and kind of hit what is that kind of middle piece that ends the second core and then the opening of the third core that leads you into them going back to Upper Earth, which that happens in episode 32. Is where, really the end of the last thing in episode 31 is the ore power erupting, and then the beginning of episode 32 is them getting dumped out into Upper Earth. So what kind of stuff do you want to zoom in on in that section to talk about?
Oh my God, there's a lot here. I mean, you have the return of Todd is really good, and we can talk about Todd's whole arc. We need to just do a section on. Byrne is still a good character at this point, and there are some great fights there. You have the introduction of the Leprechaun as a mobile suit, and some incredible fights that come out of that, both with Byrne, but then with the 3 Upper Earth people who came in right before our last batch of episodes ended. Yes. And so you have the one voiced by Norio Wakamoto, and then the other 2, I forget all their names.
Gerald, Faye, and Alan are those 3.
And Alan... or is it Jay? One of the guys dies right away, but then you have the other 2 are around for a while. But there's some really good material with them. And then you have, obviously, the complexity of the politics. This is where you have B-shot, not B-shot, that's introduced later, I'm sorry, shot weapon. Not B-shot, just normal shot. Emerging as basically the Paptimus Shiroko of this show, like the guy behind the scenes who is this slimy politician. And all that kind of stuff happening here. So, you also have that stretch where I think it's when Todd comes back, he forces they have like an aura eruption, but it doesn't take them to Upper Earth. It takes them to the world of the Ferrario. Like, there's a lot of like really, really good episodes that are paired with some amazing. I also think the animation is at its best in this stretch. The animation gets a little wonky once in a while in the Earth stuff, but in this stretch, it is on point.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a few episodes here, like kind of going in my notes, because some of these I watched fucking forever ago.
Me
because
too.
I went I went extra far before our first episode to see where to stop. So the episodes like 20 to 26 I watched like 2 months ago. But looking through my notes, one big one is episode 21, which is like basically Rimuru escapes, or the princess escapes, right? And this is the one where you really get Musy Poe becomes a much bigger character in the second half, right? She's kind of in the background in the first half of the show we talked about. And I think you just get a little bit of the stuff of her starting to become an Aura Battler and all the stuff of Shot Weapon, manipulating her and then being in a relationship. But you get this episode 21 where Rimuru flees from the castle. Musy and her brothers and her father go out to try to bring her back. Rimuru gets like brought in by this group of Garodon, who are these like wandering bandit dudes from like a kind of like Conan the Barbarian style thing. But the best part is you have this like incredible action sequence when all the fighting erupts, and Sho is dueling Musy. And in the midst of that duel, you've got Musy's father on the ground who's fighting Honwan, the Garodon that's on Sho's side that's helping them out. And in the midst of that fight, Sho knocks Musy out of the sky. She plummets to the ground and lands on top of her dad in the middle of this sword fight. And then it takes a couple of minutes for anybody to realize what happened, because this one of her brothers walks over and sees the fucking crater and the dad in there, and is like, it just collapses in tears. And it's just, that whole action sequence is fucking wild, where you've got like 3 different big scenes going on at the same time, and the way in which they all intersects together with this crazy event of Musy just falling and landing on her dad, which just communicates in that very Tomino-like way the enormousness of these machines, and how like them just existing itself is incredibly dangerous, and anybody around them could be killed in a moment out of pure fucking happenstance. And it's just a wild thing.
That whole sequence is incredible. There's a sequence where one of the Garodon pilots is like hanging off the Dunbine. There's a bunch of like great aerial stuff here. Musy turns out to be like a really great pilot, so she's really giving Sho a tough fight, and he tricks her into attacking by falling, pretending that like he's lost control, and so he's plummeting to Earth, and then she comes down, and then he delivers this blow, and that is what causes her to fall on her dad. So there's all this like aerial momentum stuff going on there. It's great. When Musy learns that her dad is dead, she says, I wrote this in my notes because it's such a good line. She says, "How could something this stupid happen? Nothing so nonsensical could happen." She's just like, this is like, she's not even sad at first, because she can't comprehend how like meaningless this death was.
Yeah, and it's just such an incredible sequence.
Yeah. I do think like in this stretch, honestly, all the way through to the end, we're talking about, Rimmel comes back into the main story, Rimuru, and that character, I still feel all the way to the end, this show is really schizophrenic on how much it wants to use her, what it wants to do with her. Like, she has a pretty good role to play at the very end of the show, but overall, like, it's either she is in the episode and is the absolute center of the action, or the show forgets that she exists. And I found that distracting throughout the entire series.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like, because in this stretch of the episodes is where Rimuru escapes, she ends up joining Sho and Nii and all of them, and for a brief stretch of episodes, she is one of the Aura Battlers on their side, and then she gets kidnapped again and brought back to Luza, and so she's with Luza and Bishot. And it feels like she's there in order to give us a little bit of an additional anchor on Bishot's side of the story when we go to Upper Earth. but I don't think she needs to be there. And I honestly think it would have just been much more effective to have her be like Keen. And she's, like in the M-Machine kind of role from Zeta Gundam, where it's like, is she a really massively important character most of the time? Not really. Is she like a good character to have around that every once in a while she can do something important? There's a good utility in action scenes to have an additional combatant there. I think she would have been better there. And I think the conclusion for her character is effective, where she kind of learns that the best thing she can do is to use her unique position as Drake and Luza's daughter as a weapon against them, rather than just running away and trying to be like any other member of the resistance. She's got a specific leverage as a political entity that she can use, and that's kind of where her character ends up. But it just is so back and forth for so much that ends up not having the potence it could have, even if she does have the most gnarly death in the show, where she's just shot between the fucking eyes by her mom.
Yeah, it's gnarly, but also, like, at that point, I was so annoyed by how many times I had to write in my notes, Rimuru escapes, / tries to escape, / is recaptured, is brought, It's one of the things that drains me about the show near the end, is it's the number of repetitive things that are happening. And that is one of them that I don't think you can claim there's any, like, good thematic purpose for it. I just think she becomes a football to the plot to be passed back and forth. And this brief period in, like, episodes 21, 22, 23, where she's piloting the Dana Oshi and doing some of this stuff, like, is the only time in the whole show she gets to be her own character doing her own stuff and not being someone else's football. And she really shines there, but mostly she's a football, and I don't like that.
Yeah, it feels like, I think there's an idea for what to do with the character, but not an idea of how to, like, build that arc naturally through the length of the show. Because I do think there is that idea of she desperately wants to be a member of the resistance. She wants to work against her father, but she's so... It refuses to kind of think about the things that she can do that are different than everybody else. And I think that is meant to be the intent, because she is a decent Aura Battler, but they don't need another person to pilot one of these fucking things. Like having a person on the inside would have been a much bigger military advantage. And I wish that they had done more with that as a story, rather than kind of waiting for the very end where she starts trying to manipulate her mom and dad against each other. It just becomes a very kind of schizophrenic character arc. But within this stretch of episodes, we do have a couple of moments that are really huge. Just like going over my notes here. Then episode 23, which is Musy's Pursuit, you've got two big exchanges, one between Sho and Rimuru, and one between Faye and Sho. And this is the one where Faye dies, and that conversation is fucking wild. So the Sho and Rimuru one, Sho says to her, I want to rid Byston Well of machines like the Aura Battlers. So this is, like, I think the first time Sho really clearly expresses that is his intent, that this is, like, the objective they have. It's not just beat Drake, it's getting rid of these things. And Rimuru says, but these machines can be kind of useful sometimes. Sho responds, people don't need machines. Before Shot brought those things here, Byston Well was a peaceful place. Rimuru says, that's not necessarily true. Sho replies, but the destruction these weapons bring is on a different scale. And there's a few things I think this conversation does. One is it defines that goal, which becomes ultimately the goal of the series. But I think it also is one of a number of conversations around this point of the show that culminates in him meeting Sheila, where Sheila describes Sho as being naive. And I think it becomes an important point of his character that he is someone who has grown up in a post-war Japan, right? That his whole life is totally outside of the shadow of war in World War II. He's lived a, like, very luxurious life, who has had problems in his home life that I think has given him kind of, like, tunnel vision for the larger thing that's going on, because his thing of, like, Byston Well was a peaceful place before Shot brought these here is a very naive thing to say. For him to, like, assert this, like, and these machines are the only thing that's the problem. And Rimuru is someone who knows this, like, well, that's not fucking true. Like, we're having wars down here with swords and catapults and fucking cavalry and shit all the time. And I think there's a lot that Sho has to go through to kind of widen his perspective here. And that happens again at the end of the episode, where you have that conversation between Faye and Sho as Faye is being killed. And Faye says to him, if you had to live as an out-of-work actor on Upper Earth, you'd know what a wonderful place this world is, right? Sho has been shouting at him, like, why you from Upper Earth? Why is someone like you following Drake? Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to note this because I noted all of these in my notes too, Sean. And that exchange between Faye and Show is also a very clear callback to episode 1 of the series, where Marvel does the same thing to Show and says, why are you mindlessly following Drake? And it's really striking that you now get, because this is still right after Show has come back to Upper Earth, he's kind of taken this more commanding role. He's effectively like displaced Nii as like the head of the Zalana crew. And he is now giving the same spiel to Faye that Marvel gave to him when he got to Byston Well. And I think that's like a really striking moment on its own. And then it gets into this other stuff you're talking about.
Yes. And so he's trying to have that exact kind of conversation. Faye says, if you had to live as an out-of-work actor on Upper Earth, you'd know what a wonderful place this world is. Show says, is that a reason to help a man who wants to destroy the world? And then this is where the conversation takes a fascinating turn. He says, I'm not going to let some Japanese say that to me. Show goes, what? He says, I'm Faye Chenquan. And Show, after the battle, and he ends up killing Faye, he mutters to himself, that's right, I'm Japanese. Does that mean I can't talk about peace in the world? And I don't think I've ever seen, off the top of my head, an anime, and this is not like it's like very directly diving deep into Japanese war crimes or whatever, but it is addressing the fact that if you're someone who is Chinese, especially at this point in time, I mean, even now, you're going to have a very specific kind of feeling about Japanese people, especially depending on where in China you lived, because of war crimes committed by the Japanese Imperial Army in World War II, and predating World War II too. And so this like moment where Show needs to recognize and is confronted with, again, this naivete of like, there is a whole history of war and malice that predates him that he can't just extract himself from entirely, that he needs to understand this larger political framework in which he lives. It's something that Marvel's better at than Show is, because I think Marvel's a little bit older and she's got a little bit more of worldliness to her. But Show, it exposes how much of a kid he still is. And it's one of the places that when later Sheila describes him as naive, and that comment really sticks with Show. And he brings it up multiple times in the second half of if it's this sort of naivete he has of not seeing the way in which the world that pre-exists him has shaped this whole conflict, and that it's not as simple as going out and winning a battle or something like that, and that it is this impossibly complicated proposition, what he's trying to do to end this conflict. And at this point, he's not at all prepared to kind of face what that actually means, and what that means to people who have very different experiences. Because Faye is not like Alan or Todd or Gerald, who have very superfluous responses to some of these questions that Show is posing to them. Like Faye being like, no, fuck you, dude. Like, you're trying to tell me like what I'm doing after what your people did to my homeland is the implication there. And Show doesn't know how to respond to that. I think it's just very fascinating.
Well, and this is like one of the secret ingredients of Dunbine is the amount of like contemporary political, it's not allegory, it's just directly calling out what is happening in contemporary like geopolitics in the show. And like obviously this episode 23, when you start getting this direct goal of we need to destroy basically the WMDs is what they're saying, right? It's as you said earlier, Sean, it's the Cold War just becomes not the subtext, but effectively the text of the show is this scenario where, because while Show does have naivete, he is also 100% correct in saying the destruction these weapons bring is on a different scale. That like if you take humans with their historical patterns of conflict and then you give them the nuke, that is a different danger than humans have ever experienced before. And that is also true here of the Aura machines. And like, that is one of the central ideas of the entire last half of the show. And like, honestly, this is one of my other complaints about the Upper Earth arc is that I think it's at its most interesting when it like directly engages with like, these are American characters dealing with like this. This is Drake, Drake Luft is at the fucking White House. We're in Paris. Like, I really like when it gets that direct, and when it is just, we're over the ocean and it's kind of a nondescript background and we're fighting, that's when I think that that's kind of at its least interesting. But when it brings in like the politics and these ideas and this stuff directly, that is like this super unique thing that there is no other show I know of that mixes the high fantasy with just the contemporary politics and geography of the day. And that is one of the most exciting things about this series.
Yeah, because to me, like, I think, like, big picture, what Tomino is doing here, I think there's, like, a number of things. But I think, like, when we're looking at these things from our kind of like Gundam brain perspective, from having done Weekly Suit Gundam, I think it's inevitable to look at this, and I think we'll obviously see Elgheim in a similar light, as these kind of like bridges to get to what Zeta Gundam is. But it very much is around here that I think it becomes clear how much this show is about Tomino using the metaphorical fantasy lens of Byston Well and all this stuff to reflect on the nature of how conflict and war has changed after he's kind of like dealt with his feelings on World War II through Mobile Suit Gundam. And he's kind of moved to a very different place, coming back to something that feels very political, very pointedly political, the way that Gundam did, whereas like Ideon is very philosophical, Zabungle has that kind of comedy edge that kind of puts in a slightly different place, and here he's coming back to a very similar tonal place that the original Mobile Suit Gundam was in, but he's looking at a different style of conflict, which obviously the Cold War was, well, in the midst of defining geopolitics in 1979 when Mobile Suit Gundam was made, but he was still looking at that kind of World War II style conflict. And one thing that's interesting when you think about the nature of Byston Well as this world that is the place where the soul goes to rest, this place that is, that the relationship between Byston Well and Upper Earth is the relationship between death and life, is what we're told. And it's part of the cycle of reincarnation. And when you think about that, well, where did the souls of all the people who died in World War II go? They all went to Byston Well. And so I think there is an implication here about like the scars that World War II left on the world are the things that create the conditions of the Cold War, quite literally, right? The fall of the 19th century style empire, the way in which the world map gets completely redrawn, and a new kind of empire defined by the military-industrial complex rises out of the ashes of the old order of things, with the United States of America and the Soviet Union taking supremacy and engaging in these proxy wars because of mutually assured destruction and all of this. But in Byston Well, in this place below our world that is the kind of like collective subconscious in some ways, this place where these souls go and go through trials in order to be purified to come back. I think it's just interesting having the sense of they are going through this cycle of more traditional kinds of war, the way that we think of them from World War II previous, about big standing armies having big battles and sieges of castles and stuff like that. And it's not the kind of small proxy wars defined by guerrilla warfare and all of that, which is what warfare becomes in the second half of the 20th century. And so the souls of the people who have died seemingly are going through this cycle, but the nature of how technology has just transformed our relationship to everything has so corrupted and broken down these kinds of barriers that it's all sunk down into Byston Well as well. And so you have all these aura machines, these, effectively these nuclear weapons, these things that can create destruction on a scale hitherto not considered. Like, that has so ruptured our relationship with the world that it has sunk into this place of our very soul. And that is the thing that you're trying to contend with. And I think that fundamental metaphor, and then how eventually it's going to explode in the final section of the show where it all erupts into literally Upper Earth, and Upper Earth is confronted with its sins in some way, I think is just such a fucking potent, fascinating central premise for a show. And this is the stage of the show where it starts becoming clear that that's what he's doing. That you start having these conversations. Sho himself is starting to having to confront the nature of him being someone who's grown up in this kind of world order, now having to confront the sins of like his parents' generation and his parents' generations and what that means, and him struggling to find his place in the world, and confronting someone whose life has been in some ways defined by the crimes committed by the Japanese Imperial Army on his home, for me, was the moment in the show that really clicked into place that this is what Tomino is trying to do with Aura Battler Dunbine.
Totally. And again, I think this is maybe the strongest stretch of the show, or at least that stretch where we first go to Upper Earth and all of that, because of, I think, how just it's firing on all cylinders. Like, I think all of that is coming to the fore, but you also have like the character work and the world building, and everything is like so tight in this stretch of episodes. Absolutely. This is also, in this stretch, is where we get Todd back. Do you want to put a pin in the Todd conversation, or do you want to go full Todd? When do we want to do the full Todd conversation?
I think let's save Todd for a little bit later. If we can do a whole Todd talk, I think because I wanted that a little bit more embedded in the Upper Earth arc, because that's where it comes back around. One thing we can talk about, at least briefly, is some of the action stuff here is so fucking radical, to the point where in my notes I just copy and pasted a picture from Dragon Ball Z of Goku and Frieza locking fists as they're pushing their aura against or their ki against each other, because you have that wild sequence. I think it's episode 25 is the one where this happens, where it's Sho and Burn are fighting. And Burn is just so pushed to the fucking limits. He's just fed up with all this shit, and he's going for broke. He's in a leprechaun at this point, one of the best Aura battlers of the show. And then they end up in this contest of strength in the middle of the sea that then rips the sea open. Is their Aura powers just blowing the sea apart? And it's the two of them standing at the bottom of an open sea with their arms locked. Again, like a contest of strength a la Super Saiyan Goku and Frieza in the Namek arc. But one thing that Sho does that Goku doesn't do, which would have been pretty gnarly if Goku had done it, is he just rips the leprechaun's arm straight off, like it's Beowulf fighting Grendel, is how I described it in my notes. And it's one of the coolest fucking things in any Tomino show. Like that battle and the conclusion for it, it's one of those places where you feel how the nature of the Aura battlers allows Tomino and his team to do action in a way that's just so different than anything he's ever done, because the kind of more supernatural things that he gets into in like Zeta Gundam at the end with the biosensor, or some of the stuff in like Char's Counterattack or Double Zeta where the new type stuff becomes super powerful, or like the Moonlight Butterfly and Turn A Gundam is very different than this kind of like high speed energy, key kind of shit that is so Dragon Ball, pre-Dragon Ball, but very Dragon Ball. And it's fucking crazy. It's so good.
You put the Dragon Ball Z image in your notes, which are typed. My notes are handwritten, and I loved this scene so much. I drew out for myself an image of, because there's this shot where the Dunbine is flooding, and then Sho overloads his power, his body erupts in light, and the ocean parts like fucking Moses is there, and it creates this image, and this is what I drew in my notes to make myself remember it, like this eye and pupil like create, and like honestly, this is I think the best animated scene in the entire show. It's like it could be out of the Idion Be Invoked movie or like Gundam Movie 3. It's like full cinematic quality. It's absolutely unreal what is going on in this scene, and I agree. And like honestly, here's my hottest take I'm gonna have here. Burn should have died in this scene. This is where they should have let that character go. I think that character is such a dead-end cul-de-sac from this point on, because he's gone here until he comes back as the Black Knight. This is his last fight as Burn. At the end, he has this whole speech where he goes, I want to win, I want to defeat him, and he screams, I am a descendant of knights. And then he weeps over he's literally weeping. And I like kind of the idea of the Black Knight, but it's very like Gundam Wing Char clone to me, in that, especially because he's such a cul-de-sac where he just loses, comes back, people keep trusting him, even though he never accomplishes anything. And I honestly think if he had fucking died there, he's a legendary character you never forget, versus I think he gets very cheapened over the last half of the show, and I kind of wish he would have given his speech, wept, and then blown up. I think that would have been the right ending for Burn Bunnings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't dislike the Black Knight stuff. I think in the version of the show that had fewer episodes to wrap up, the Black Knight stuff would have worked very well, because I think the introduction of it works for me. You have that incredible. This is getting a little bit ahead of it, but you have that sequence where they're all back on Upper Earth. He's had a duel with Sho. And then you have that moment where he gets like lost at sea, and like a fishing boat fishes him up, and they give him a blanket and some food, and he sits on the deck of that boat and quietly weeps to himself. Which is like the first time after coming to Upper Earth where you see like the emotional toll on the people of Byston Well being removed from their home. And then at the beginning of the next episode, a bunch of Bishot's men just fucking blow up that ship and kill all the people, and he gets in their thing and flies away with them, and gives a single moment when he looks back. And so there are a couple of moments like that with Burn in his kind of Black Knight phase that works well for me. The problem with it is the constant losing. Like if he was more in the background scheming and he had like 2 or 3 confrontations with Sho that ended more in a stalemate, I think the Black Knight stuff would have been totally fine. The issue is the constant oh no, and I'm on my little scooter and I'm going to fly away. As you say, it dilutes the character tremendously.
That's where it becomes like a bad Char clone to me, because like one of the magic tricks of original Gundam is that Char Aznavour is in episode 1 to episode 43, but he never gets repetitive or boring, because like Tomino is really disciplined about how often Char actually goes out and fights Amuro. And at the beginning, Char is only losing because the Gundam is stronger. Later on, he's still doing interesting stuff. He's mostly scheming behind the scenes, not directly fighting Amuro. And so when you get to the end, it doesn't feel ridiculous that, like, people in the Zeon army are continuing to give Char mobile suits, right? Like, in this show, it is fucking ludicrous that anyone trusts Burn Bunnings because he is a useless fighter. And that isn't how it should feel. And so, like, I agree, there are moments with the Black Knight stuff that I think work really well. But overall, it gets to the point where all I really see when I look at him is Skeletor. I see a Saturday morning cartoon whose goal is to, or like Team Rocket on Pokemon. His goal is to come out every time, lose, and then run away. And that's just not who the character was. And so, like, I feel like him dying here and then replacing whatever function he has in the plot with, like, give more to Musi. Musi's a really good character. I think you could do a lot more with her down the home stretch. There's other, like, just have more fighters in the rotation. I don't know. Like, Todd is someone they're able to keep alive. Like, Todd is able to challenge Show in a way that Burn, after this point, never does again. And so, like, that's where the other part of the repetition sets in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things of why Todd works so well in the home stretch is in part because he isn't used in this way, right? So the Black Knight, because Todd only fights Show a couple of times after they go to Upper Earth. You don't, and like the Black Knight is the one they're using for like the more kind of like, oh, we need another episode where this happens, and then the Black Knight is thrown in there rather than Todd is there for a bit, and then there's a big stretch where he's not, and then he comes back in. And Black Knight is like this character that's like sacrificed at the altar of, we've got 7 more episodes to do this. I think it's a shame.
Someone, probably Tomino, had the idea that Show's death would be jumping out of his, out of the Bilbine into the whatever, I don't know what mobile suit we're on at that point with
it's
Burn,
like it's not even a mobile suit or an Aura Battler, because it's the their equivalent of mobile armors at that point.
Yeah, but he's going to jump from his cockpit into Burn's cockpit, and they're going to stab each other and die. And look, I'll give it to you, that is a rad as absolute fuck image. It rocks. I think because they have to keep him alive until that point, I don't think Burn has the character resonance that they, like Todd would have had more resonance in that moment. I like Todd's actual death, and I'm glad it happens where it does, but like, who actually feels like a meaningful rival for Show to die in a self-like sacrificial thing? I don't think it feels like it's Burn Bunnings at that point because of how diluted he's become.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Yeah. But we will always have what now we indelibly will think of as the Goku Frieza mobile suit fight, or the Grendel Beowulf fight, as you're saying, because, it rocks.
It turns out having two people or a man and a monster lock arms in a contest of strength, and then one of them winning, especially one of them winning by ripping off the other's arm, turns out that's just a cool dude thing to do. And Show's a pretty cool dude at this point. Episode
26, right after this, is where Gerald Kuchibi, let's remember, her name is Gerald Kuchibi. Oh my God.
Let's remember that we later learned that she grew up in fucking Dublin. So that apparently is an Irish surname.
Gerald Kuchibi, I. Yeah, yes. It sounds right.
In her leprechaun, because the people of Byston Well are racist? I don't know.
Do they know enough about I don't... Yeah, it's that's a weird one. But there you go. Yeah, she's in her leprechaun. But this is where Miss Gerald Kuchibi takes center stage. And she, I think, is one of the highlights of the last half of the show. Because she's a character who does not ever suffer from this, she gets, a specific use. She's one of the only people who really dies in the Upper Earth stretch before the last, 4 episodes. So, her big death scene is one of the ones that really sticks out. And this is where she starts being active, and she is the one who, deduces that Elle Hunnam, or however you say her name, is the one who who opened the Aura Road for Show, and so attacks. And that is what results in the death of Elle's mother, and then Elle really taking center stage as, the other queen character of the final arc. And so there's a lot of good stuff here.
Yes, and we can't forget that Ella's mom is Pat Hood Hunnam.
Pat
Which
Hood
is a
Hunnam.
great name if I've ever heard one.
I also just got to say, this episode, I'm seeing it in my notes and I'm remembering this. There's a scene where Alan, which is the Wakamoto character who's from Upper Earth, is sitting in his mech listening to his Walkman. His old, like, Sony, the yellow, like, Walkman with his headphones. It's one of those images where every so often, and all the way to the end of the show, you'll get these, where it'll remind you of how hard we are mixing high fantasy with totally contemporary, like, mundane shit. And those images are just so rad. I love that. Just this normal dude sitting in his mech listening to his fucking Walkman. Stuff like that is why this show rocks.
Yes, and I feel like those are some good AA batteries you had in that fucking thing, because that thing lasted a long time on Upper Earth, or in Byston Well.
I know we're going to have our Todd conversation later, but just while I'm scrolling through my notes, Todd has so many good lines also in this stretch. Like when he is revived, he says, "When you see hell, you get a bit more civilized," which is fucking great. And then in this episode, we're talking about episode 26, is where Todd says to Sho, "Have you grown so old that you can lecture strangers now, Sho?" Todd becomes the most fucking rad character on this show. It's so good.
He gets a huge glow up after his near-death experience.
Yes.
It's great.
And episode 27 is when you then get the kind of mini arc here where Todd and Sho shoot off in a beam of light and they land on this like windy red planet that is basically like Mars, the Byston Well version of Mars, but then we learn is like this the homeland of the Garo Ran, and then this leads them to where they meet the Shiela and all of that stuff, and it's the Sphere of Tempest is what it's called, and this stretch is also really impressive.
Yeah, this is one of those episodes that has just like really great background art, and especially it's great because for a while you don't even know if you're still on Byston Well or we like on actual Mars or what the fuck's happening, and then eventually you see that's like, oh, it is this like crazy massive sphere of like swirling rocks and dust that just drift across the world of Byston Well, I guess, and they've warped inside of that. And it's a pretty gnarly sequence, and yes, and I do really like that whole stretch of meeting these new characters, Sheila and Elfino. You get like Sheila is this character who kind of both is supporting Sho, but I like that moment at the end of 27 where she confronts him and says that he's naive, right, and that he needs to kind of like, if he's going to be this person that's going to accomplish this idea that we're going to get rid of the aura machines, like he is someone who needs to become more than what he currently is to accomplish that goal.
And while I have slightly mixed feelings on the Bilbine itself as a design and stuff, mostly liking it though, the introduction of the Bilbine is one of my favorite things in this show. It's one of the best transitions from, Mech 1 to Mech 2 in one of these series because it happens through this Sphere of Tempest arc. And technically the moment when it arrives is just she sends it out to him. But the buildup of it is, it's very Arthurian. It feels like a King Arthur story where he has to go to this like fantasy land. Shiela is kind of Lady in the Lake-esque in that he finds her, in that he follows the fairies and finds Shiela Lapana. And she says she's going to give him a trial the Sphere of Tempest thing will be the trial to prove if he will be the true battler, the true Seisenshi, worthy of the new machine and all of that. And then it is through doing all that he like proves himself. And I love that kind of narrativization of how he ultimately is sent the Bilbine, because when it's actually sent to him in episode like 29 or 30, it's this kind of Deus Ex Machina moment where he gets this like amazing new machine just shipped to him. But the legwork that has been given to us, and the fact that we know it's coming, because we've seen Shiela separately say, we're going to give him the Bilbine, and you're just kind of waiting like, when does it come? It's such a good narrative way to do that switch to the new mech.
Absolutely, yeah. I really love that that whole sequence. I say that the sort of pseudo-Arthurian, very mythological feeling of it. It's a very different kind of flavor of how we do this kind of shift over. And then when Sho gets the Bilbine, he just shows up and fucking wrecks shop, which is pretty fantastic. There is one of my favorite little moments in the show is in that episode 29, the appearance of the Bilbine, where you have, before that big fight where Sho ends up kind of losing and then he gets the Bilbine back, you have this little moment between him and Marvel where they're sitting in their cockpits and they have their cockpit doors open, which kind of open out, and then they kiss behind them, and Sham is kind of like watching it happen, and you kind of get the silhouettes of them through the open cockpit doors, but we're seeing just the wall of the cockpit.
It's framed through the green glass of the Dunbine cockpit, so we see them tinted green. It's an amazing scene, because Sho has this line where he talks about, we've fought for justice, so we're going to win, still kind of that naivete, right? And he has this line about how he could love they talk about how they could, it's always this, like, they never really consummate it, but they always, and this goes to the end of the show, they talk about how they could be, like, in another life lovers, but they have this tender little moment. Yeah, it's stuff like that is great. And all of the action in this stretch is so virtuosic. The thing that, like, I think distinguishes this middle stretch of the show is how many layers action is happening across, like, in the literal sense of, like, how animation is made, and manipulating the different layers of the image, the cells versus the backgrounds. And, like, when you have, because this is when you have all the, like, the King Foizon stuff, and you're still in Byston Well, so you have the different warring kingdoms, and you'll have, 7 different Aura Battlers on screen, and other different support ships, and you'll have mountains and castles, and, like, all of that rich, like, moving across those layers, that sense of the aerial action. It's really incredible, and there's a lot of good action still in the Upper Earth stretch. I do think Upper Earth, the last batch of episodes, like the last 13, I think overly rely on we're just over the ocean and we're against a blue sky, and I think it loses some of what makes just how dynamic and special the action on Byston Well is, and I think it could be equally special on Earth, and there's some episodes like the Paris one that 100% get that. But I think it's something that the show falls back on more generic backgrounds that disappointed me later, because it's so well done here.
Yeah. Around here is where we get this episode 30, Silky's Escape, where you get the kind of setup for what is ultimately going to happen, where they help get Silky out. This is the last time we see Sho on his motorcycle, which has happened a couple of times. Whenever they go back to Jake's original castle, Sho gets to be on his original motorcycle, and finally it runs out of gas, which is a thing that it's been 2 or 3 times he's gotten back on that thing, and every time I'm like, how the fuck does that thing still have gas left in the tank after all this time? Finally it runs out of gas, but they escape with Silky, and they go back to the land of the Mifrario with Jacoba Aun, and that's where you get this first lore dump, which is fantastic because you then learn 2 episodes later that this is her just totally bullshitting them. I mean, she's saying some things that are true, but it's also her manipulating them. So she has this whole little speech she gives where this is the first time you have a big lore dump about the nature of Byston Well. It's made more explicitly clear, because the last time they saw her, she said that there is no connection between Upper Earth and Byston Well. She lies to them, which is why they shouldn't be really trusting her here, because she's already blatantly lied to them and is now telling them the exact opposite of what she said before. But she says here, normally passage between Byston Well and Upper Earth can only happen through life and death. However, these precepts were broken, torn asunder by these machines. I believe that may be because the world itself is shaking with fear. This is your Cold War stuff, right? If the world itself is to be destroyed, the world itself will quiver. That's such a fucking good line. Yes. Proof of this is the people of Upper Earth appearing in Byston Well. It seems time has bestowed trials upon the souls of man. We Ferrario no longer have power to control this. Could you not remove the root of this disturbance, these machines, from this world? And this is where he has seemingly bestowed his mystical duty from the goddess, more or less, with this amazing little speech. Again, with, I think it's hard not to look at this directly in reference to the Cold War, in the sense of the world on the brink of destruction, and that the world itself is to be destroyed. The world itself will quiver, and the quivering of the world is what has opened up these gaps in the Aura Road. And of course, what she's really doing here, we find out 2 episodes later, is she is trying to provoke the conflict even more to send them to this kind of final battle, because she's going to borrow their aura power in order to cast the spell, or whatever verb you want to use for it, to banish all the aura machines and just send all this shit back to Upper Earth. Let you fuckers deal with it. Like, you got to get you out of Byston Well, because the world itself is breaking. And so she is manipulating them here. But I think this is just such a critical scene in the kind of like opening up the last arc of the series.
100%. And I was noting all of this too in my notes. And one of the things I noted is the same thing you said, Sean, of just how like peak Tomino the writing is here. There's another line in this episode, it's much earlier, where Marvel says, and I forget who she's saying this to, but I had to write this down because it's the most Tomino line ever. She says, unless you have the eyes to see the present and the eyes to see tomorrow, aura power won't flow, you know? And I was just like, oh my god, put that on his fucking grave when he eventually dies, unless you have the eyes to see the past and the eyes to see tomorrow. It's like, that is such a great description of the entire Tomino narrative ethos, you know?
Yes, it's Marvel's sort of almost like pseudo mentorship of shows. He's trying to kind of teach him these things because again he's naive. He's a couple years younger than her. He still needs to be the hero he's trying to be.
I also like the lore detail in that same scene you were just saying where when Sho and Marvel and Silky are summoned to Lady Jacoba, she turns Silky into a me Ferrario as punishment, and we get that distinction of what the me Ferrario are versus the L Ferrario, or are that it's like
a,
the me
A Ferrario.
A Ferrario, yes.
That's the letter E.
Yes, and she says they must now, me Ferrario then has to spend centuries among the Komon, which are like the normal people of Byston Well, and so we learn Cham is in this situation too, and I like that whole the different layers of the soul and its place in Byston Well, and I just love seeing all of that stuff.
Yeah, and you have this moment where Cham sees that of Silky being turned into a me Ferrario, which little detail here, if you watch the pseudo sequel OVA, Silky is the person who is basically the Cham of that show. So they bring her back as in her me Ferrario form to be Shio's companion, which is a cool detail. But I love that Cham has this moment where she sees that and she's like, is that what happened to me? Because clearly the me Ferrario don't really know that this is part of how this whole fucking thing works, or that maybe at least it can work, because we did see a me Ferrario be born out of a flower, so seemingly it's they can be created, but also as an A Ferrario you can be kind of demoted back into a me Ferrario as punishment. I mean, we also see that Knuckle-V, who is summoned here, that is the one that brought Marvel into Byston Well, and she had been turned into a Gadoran as punishment, and that was the one that nursed Todd back to health. And so not only can an A Ferrario be demoted into a me Ferrario, they can also turn into a Gadoran. Presumably they can also become a common person, which this is one of an issue I have with a lot of the translations of Aura Battler Dunbine, is I feel like it has to be the intent that Komon is meant to be common. It has to be they are the common folk. And I refuse to accept the romanization of spelling it Komon. I just can't do it. It drives me crazy every time it happens to the subtitles. I'm like, come on. It has to be. I just can't believe that that's not what it's supposed to mean.
That does make a lot more sense. I would absolutely agree. Episode 31, which is leading into, obviously, everyone getting sent up to Upper Earth, where we have another series of incredible battles here. And you have this scene where Sho goes to court, and he announces his intention to rid Byston Well of machines, which causes consternation. And he's posed this question of but you're using but you're using one of these machines to destroy machines. And his answer, and we hear this a couple times from other people too, is the idea of we're using poison to fight poison. But it's such a flagrantly bad answer. It's such an unsatisfying way of phrasing this that I think it sets up Jacoba's ultimate goal and what happens, which is just that no, this is all wrong. And it kind of leads to what is the kind of I don't know, kind of the pseudo-nihilism of the ending of no, the only actual way to do this is for all of us to kill each other until nothing is left. Which is this thing that the grinding nature of that last arc is what's going to lead Sho to that conclusion, and he's not there yet, you know?
Yes. I mean, it's definitely, I think it's a central question at the center of the show that it can't answer. It's very, similar to that monologue that the Stellan Skarsgård character gives in Andor, right? When he talks about I use the tools of my enemy to fight my enemy. That's I'm cursed in that way that I have to use this violence to fight the violence. That I have to violate my own principles in order to try to build a better world. And that feels like that's kind of the thing they're trying to say, but that's always an unsatisfying answer and never really sort of resolves the additional question of, but then what what comes of the resentment that you birth from using these methods, right? And I think obviously there's no answer to that question. That's like a deep philosophical issue of like, how does one, hold ideals of peace and pacifism and compassion while also trying to rid the world of those that would violate those ideals on a massive scale. And it's obviously that's a complicated thing to grapple with. And you see here again, like the ease with which Sho comes to this, like, this what is like a saying in Japanese, right? To fight poison with poison, basically our fight fire with fire. It shows that I think he's not like fully kind of trying to yet grapple with what does that actually fucking mean. And he's definitely not there.
Definitely, and it's also, like, to make the more anime comparison, it's just, the guiding question of Hayao Miyazaki's entire career is this sort of thing, is that tension between using and, in some cases, like, aesthetically enjoying weaponry and planes, and in this case, mechs and all of that, in an anti-war context. And, like, that is an interesting thing in Dunbine, is that I think this is Tomino engaging with that question more directly than he generally does. Like, I think when he comes at it from a slightly different angle, which I think of as more like the Turn A Gundam thing, the Lawrence Cow episode or something like that, of like, thinking of it more of like the condition behind the technology and what it's used for and kind of the utilitarian aspects of all of that. And it gets more into this philosophical vein, whereas this is that more immediate question that you see in the same period, like a Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, or much later when he's an old man, The Wind Rises, in Miyazaki's stuff of like, how the fuck do you live between these ideas? And I think it's interesting to see Tomino like hit that right on the head here too.
Yeah, and it's very, connected to that kind of framework I talked about from the Fujitsu Ryota book I've been reading on all this stuff, the on Tomino Yoshiyuki book that we talked about in the Ideon episode, where he has this framework of understanding a lot of Tomino's thematic stuff as being a central kind of thematic concern for Tomino is the structure of the self, the world, and technology, and that technology is the medium through which the self interfaces with the world. And that is all, obviously, like, literally made true in some ways here with Byston Well by having this actual, like, sort of fantasy world that exists in this spiritual sense, and that the technology has become so powerful that it has ripped open that whole interface question, right? That's like that the technology has in some way almost like infected the self, that has been sublimated down into this more essential level of human existence that we can't separate ourselves from this technology. It's gotten so far, is kind of, I think, some of what we're seeing here with Dunbine, that the military industrial complex of the second half of the 20th century has created a world so dependent and so defined by the technology that it uses, and oftentimes the military technology it uses, most prominently the A-bomb and the H-bomb, that it has corrupted our very soul, I think is kind of the implication there. Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
So at this point, Sean, this is where we enter kind of the diverging ways you and I watched this show,
yes.
Which is that you're coming from Super Robot Wars Y and Alpha and every other fucking, however many you've played at this point.
It's just those two. It's just Super Robot Wars Y and Alpha. So far.
Okay. Where, as you explained to us earlier, the like difference, the way it shows the story of Aura Battler Dunbine is this section where Jacoba has like sent them up to Upper Earth, and that's how the characters emerge. So you knew not only that this was coming, but the way it happens and all of that,
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had the sense that we were like, I knew that we were going to be going back to Upper Earth. I'd like seen that in chatter. I didn't know exactly when or where or how, or that it would be everyone. Like my kind of read on it was that, like if I was predicting at this point in the show, I would have told you it was going to be something around Drake learning about Upper Earth from Sho or someone else, or like some of this stuff, and deciding he wants to conquer that instead, or also, or whatever, and like manipulating some scenario whereby he opens a portal and goes there. Like, I thought it was going to be more the humans choosing it, like the Drake faction, like forcing this issue, because that is how, like, that is also the anxiety that Sho has when he gets back, is like, oh my god, what if someone as bloodthirsty as Drake got to Upper Earth with that firepower? How bad would that be? But no, I got to enjoy this kind of as a complete surprise, which is that, and it does it in a very clear repeat of like episode 15, where he goes back to Upper Earth for the first time, of we're reaching this like pitched point in the battle where it feels like we're going to resolve or hit some kind of new status quo shift in the overall battle of these nations in Byston Well, and instead the aura power is released and Jacobon goes, enough of you guys, fuck off, and she dies, sending them all up to Upper Earth. The episode 32 is called Surfacing, which I love, and you just have this insane animation of the heavens opening and all the machines caught in this light show and everyone appearing on Earth. And whatever we think about the later episodes in this stretch, I think this first couple of episodes where you see like Todd arriving in Boston and him searching for his mom, and Gerald arriving in Dublin, and Marvel getting to her parents' ranch, and basically everything that happened to Sho in that earlier stretch now happening to all of our main characters as they arrive across Earth and start just causing chaos, is like an incredible piece of drama. And I think the fact that it comes so relatively quickly, like Jacoba has just given Sho what he thinks is his like holy mission of destroying the Aura Battlers, but in Byston Well, and now everything has been thrown off. I was like losing my mind at how good this stretch of episodes is.
Yeah, I mean, even knowing that it was going to happen, like actually seeing the detail of how it unfolds is incredibly satisfying. Like, I particularly love, there's just so much great like detail as you just get this sort of like sweeping episode 32, that shows all of this. One little thing, the show doesn't linger on this, and maybe it's a practical point, but I think it's a storytelling detail, is that all the Upper Earthers end up back at their home except for Shot. Shot Weapon is the only Upper Earther. I mean, him and Zet Light, who is on the same ship as him, both of them end up just, I think, over the Pacific Ocean or something, but they're just kind of deposited at a random point on the Earth, the way that all the other Byston Well people are, that they're all deposited at some random point, and if you're going to be deposited at a random point, it's almost certainly going to be over an ocean, just statistically speaking. And so Shot Weapon just sort of pops up there with all the other Upper Earthers, and there's something I think it says a lot about this fucking guy, that he has no home is what it feels like that's telling us, which I think is a great detail, because everyone else, you see them intersecting with their home. Gerald ends up in Dublin, and this is where I have in my notes the revelation of Gerald Kujibi is Irish, which is both a shock and also delightful, because it, like, her being this like punk rock chick and her growing up in the streets of Dublin, just it all comes together so perfectly. The character design, everything. I'm like, I don't know why her last name is Kuchibi. That's a surprise to me. But everything else, like her being this punk girl from the streets of Dublin, is fucking rad, because Gerald is very rad. We get to see Marvel go home to the little ranch on Texas, where her dad and mom are. We find out that her family runs this ranch. We already knew they're from Texas. But also that on that ranch is a horse that they named Macho, which is a great name for a horse. And her dad just has a fucking 6-shooter revolver, which he does point at Marvel because they think that she might be an alien before she explains it. And we learn that Marvel comes from a much, much better family than Sho does. That her parents are obviously shocked and suspicious at first, but then they pretty quickly like come around to, oh yeah, you're definitely my daughter. But the best one, by far, is Todd just popping up in the middle of fucking Boston, right at his family home. He just goes into the house, and he just goes, Mommy, I'm here. And he goes over to the fridge, opens it up, just grabs some like sliced bologna or something from the fridge, a loaf of bread on top, and he's just two-handing it. Well, he just goes for a bite of bologna and then a bite of the loaf of bread. It just goes back and forth while he's trying to ask if mommy is home, literally the word mommy. And it's the best. It's the best fucking thing in the whole show. That scene is just incredible.
Yes. And again, just underline, it is not him saying some Japanese equivalent of the word mommy that is translated. He is saying in English, mommy, and it is fantastic. And oh boy, we get Freudian with our boy Todd here. But like, all of this stuff is good. And I really, I think, to me, just to give some like clarity into where I think the show starts losing me, I'm totally on board with this through, I would say, episode 37, which is the Hyper Gerald episode, and it's where she goes big and then dies. And I think, like, it's probably 38, 39 into the 40s where I start falling off a little bit. But up through there, as everyone is, like, finding their bearings, creating this new status quo, and particularly what I love and what I think gets lost in the 40s stretch of episodes is how much engagement there is with like actual Earth geography, actual like things they have to deal with now they're back on Earth. Like in episode, I think it's 33 or 34, where it might be 35. It's in this stretch where they go to Hawaii, and that is where
33 is where
it's 33. Okay, that is where Sho finds Marvel in Hawaii. They're riding in a convertible with Hawaiian shirts,
yes,
which is like, that's like a Toriyama Dragon Ball cover illustration right there, right? Like, it's so good. And you have all of that stuff they're dealing with. Marvel has a Hawaiian friend named Barbara who's helping them out. You have this whole stretch where they have to figure out how to use like get a better radio, and they're dealing with like different military factions. They realize like, hey, this whole world is a fucking military industrial complex. Let's go straight to the manufacturers. You've got all of that stuff. You've got the episode 35, which is with the Russian man Tolstoy Cheselenko. Oh my God. Very much the Russian equivalent of Gerald Kuchibi, in that I kind of see where their brain got off the highway, because Tolstoy kind of sounds like Tolstoy, but other than that, that is not a Russian name. And I think that's a really good episode where it's like playing with that. And I do think, looking at it, like one of the things that it does lose me a little bit in the 40s is it becomes a lot of like nondescript areas where they're fighting, and it's just all the Byston Well people fighting each other. And I really like it when they foreground the like actual like, no, we're on not just Earth, but contemporary Earth. We are in named locations. We are dealing with like real shit in our contemporary setting. Like, one of the comparisons I made is like, Aura Battler Dunbine is a portal fantasy in the sense of like, if the Chronicles of Narnia had a book where Aslan came to our world and started mauling people. Like, it's this special thing that like other portal fantasies don't do, which is sending the fantasy shit back through the portal to fuck shit up in our recognizable world. And I love, love, love that stuff. And I think at least this first batch of episodes through like the end of the 30s does that really, really well.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. Although I think part of me was, I think like the after episode 33 is where I think I start kind of being a little bit hot or cold on some episodes. And then eventually once you get to around 40, the Paris in Flames episode is where I actually start to really like where I think the show kind of settles. Because I think I think in this stretch you get kind of like a really good episode, and then like an episode that feels kind of repetitive or that doesn't quite land. Like the Tolstoy episode was one I did not particularly like all that much.
Oh, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I think because I do think the show actually does mostly stick with some of what you're talking about, of where, generally speaking, you first have this arc where it's about everyone needs to figure out where the fuck are we and what do we do? And so it's about like Drake ends up settling over in America. And then we have Ella and Sheila are kind of separated, and we need to get to them and then get them together. And then you have Bishop, and they're all in the area of like basically Europe. And so they're fighting in the vicinity of Europe, kind of moving across it. And so that's where you like start. You start in kind of Eastern Europe, and then you start moving your way into Western Europe with Paris. Then eventually you move all the way across into the UK, and then eventually that's when it starts moving into them fighting over the ocean as they're making their way towards basically North America. And so it's in that last little stretch where they're kind of in the final battle, where Drake starts moving it from America towards where they are across. And so that's where I think like you do end up in that last stretch of episodes where they're all fighting over the ocean. But for most of this section, it is very clear geographically like where they are and where they're moving and like what the kind of battle lines are supposed to be. And I like all that stuff. Like, because basically this stretch, the thing of once they kind of settle into that this is like a proper war, this is like a standing conflict between two armies with a pretty clearly defined front that they are fighting along in multiple engagements, is it starts moving into this almost Romance of the Three Kingdoms-esque structure that's very much like the mid to end part of Romance of the Three Kingdoms once there are actually three kingdoms and there's like a sustained conflict on multiple fronts, and you get these like episodes that are about these like individual strategies that are enacted. And so I do like once you start getting into the like military tactics and strategies that Sheila is engaging with, and they are like repeatedly outsmarting Bishop with these like interesting tactics where you have these moments of like episode 39 where Bishop takes Marvel hostage and is like trying to use that to threaten them. And instead of doing the kind of like generic thing you would expect the good guys to do, which is to succumb to that plan or something, Sheila just goes, no, fuck that. I'm going to use that against you. Like, we're going to take the fact that you are threatening and using Marvel as a hostage as a way to create a military strategy that maybe Marvel will end up dying. It's risky there, but it gives us a huge advantage. And otherwise, Sheila and Ella are at a military disadvantage compared to Bishop and Drake, because they clearly have less soldiers, less machines, and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a series of episodes where you see like the military tactics that Sheila uses, and that she is way better at this than Bishop. And Bishop kind of sucks, and he is only surviving by the number of people he's got and the fact that taking down these massive Aura ships that have these giant fucking barriers is almost an impossible, inhuman task. That like ultimately the only thing that can do it is basically the kamikaze style strategies that they end up resorting to in the last few episodes. And I do think there's just like a clear progression in the military narrative being told here of these two different sides using strategies, using tactics in clever ways, being manipulative, using these kind of grand stratagems to try to seal the deal. And it just keeps slipping out of their hands time and time again. Now, I think it does it too many times, and I think there are moments where it gets repetitive, but I also think that seeing the toll that plays on show and everybody else as they are literally like killing themselves. There's multiple times where shows like going hyper, and we'll need to back up with all that stuff and talk about those moments where he is like expending his very literal life energy trying to finish these conflicts, and they just can't do it because trying to take down these Aura ships again is like almost an impossible feat. And so there's something about that, I think, very intentional narrative that they start telling, along with, I just very much enjoyed the military tactics that felt much better considered and like are of a very different style than the kind of thing you got when we were in Byston Well, which were these like small focused skirmishes and not these large engagements between two armies, basically. That's some of the stuff that I really enjoyed in the last 10 episodes or so.
So I get all that, and I don't even necessarily disagree with all of that. Like, I also enjoy the military tactics stuff a lot. I think a lot of that is, like, they do a lot of good, like, outlining for you where the different ships are moving and in what order we will go to, like, try to cut off X ship, Y ship, blah, blah, blah. And I like all of that nuts and bolts stuff. I also, however, think sometimes there's a real difference between the show being able to tell us where we are in the world and why we're there, which it always is able to do. Like, you can map all of this if you took out a map of the Earth, and you could do all that. And, like, feeling it in the art direction. And I can just see, like, in my notes, as I, like, go through my handwritten notes, how many words I am using to describe the settings and the things I am seeing and the visuals and the aesthetics, and how that falls off in the 40s and just kind of gets blown. That just stops being a thing I'm noticing in the show. And I don't think that's me. I do think that is the show. Again, some of these episodes, as you say, with the, like, again, I do think all the way through, like, episode 40, I'm into it. I think episode 39 is the one where Todd kidnaps Marvel, and then you have that is the best episode of, like, military tactics stuff in the show. That is fantastic. That is, I completely agree, really, really good. I think the other thing, and this is where, like, this is my biggest sticking point with this stretch, is I think B-Shot is a boring bad character. Not a bad character. He's boring, and I think he's really bad at what he does. And I think the show way over indexes on how much time we spend on his faction when you also have Drake and Shot Weapon out there. And it's really unequal because most of the last core of the show is repetitive encounters with the Geagring, where Sheila will come up with a fucking brilliant plan that as you're watching you think, okay, this is the episode where we deal with the Geagring, which I shortened to GG in my notes, so I just think of it now in my head as the GG. This is where we're going to deal with
we also have the Gurdan Galan, so you can't rely on the GG.
Yes. Anyway, I'm like, this is the episode where we're going to deal with Bishot, and then we're going to move on and deal with, like, my expectation is that we're going to do something like deal with Bishot. I was thinking they were going to then deal with Drake, and then Shot Weapon is going to be the kind of final bad guy. And I don't need it to be that kind of funnel structure, but I need to have some kind of sense of progression and momentum, because you get to the final 3 episodes, and it doesn't feel like the show is building up to an ending until people start dying in the anti-penultimate episode, because nothing has happened. You go like 10 episodes of, are we going to destroy Bishot this time? No. Are we going to destroy Bishot this time? No. Are we going to destroy Bishot this time? No. Are we going to find anyone other than Bishot? No. And like, that's where I get annoyed, is that I think you could accomplish a lot of what you're talking about while mixing it up. And we could have an episode fighting the Will Whips, and we could have an episode focused on the Spriggan. And we really don't get all of that until the last handful of episodes when the Spriggan and the Will Whips are like in position. There's like most of the Upper Earth arc, Drake Luft is not a character. He's off. We're hearing about things he is doing, but we don't ever see them, and he's not in our line of sight. And so it just feels like our heroes are having an impossible time fighting the show's worst villain. And at a certain point, they've nuked, they've literally nuked the Geagring so many times that it's like, why are we even trying anymore? And if you at least broke that up with like fighting other enemies, I would be more into it. It's the sheer repetition and the fact that we have other factions out there that are not actively being used. And that's where, like, I do feel like less of Tomino's authorial signature in just how flat it is. Because I feel like if you go to his other shows, when you have this many players on the board, we would be using them all more. And I don't like how flat, it's like, it's too much of Sheila versus this one ship that is invincible. And that's what annoys me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, again, I think there are too many episodes that are focused on that piece. I think there's a few reasons why it didn't bother me so much. I think one is I just think I found a lot of interest and value out of the kind of Sisyphean nature of what they're doing. That at a certain point, it felt like very purposeful, where I think one of the things to compare it with Zabungle, right, which is where we had another thing where you get into that second half of the show and you have this very kind of repetitive structure. There in Zabungle, it really bothered me, where you had the Elchi arc where you have these series of engagements over and over and over again that don't really move the story forward, but they also don't change the characters in any way. And so in that, it really bugged me because, as we talked about, the status quo of like Jiron and Elchi and Rag and all of them basically doesn't shift for like 10 or so episodes in that show. Whereas here, I think like I think it's very clearly dramatized the toll that it is taking on everybody. That like that they cannot finish this conflict. That is this like seemingly impossible thing. And I think there's something about like the desperation of it, in the sense of that this is just sapping everything of us trying to finish this conflict, that feels like it reflects in some ways that kind of Cold War sense of sort of nihilism, of this feeling of everything we can't, like, how do you like stop the Soviet Union? How do you stop America? How do you stop this thing that no matter what you throw at it, even if you did throw the nukes, like, what is this even going to do? The sense of like, we are dealing with superpowers at this point in the world. And so this like band of heroes trying to throw themselves against this problem, even though they're smarter, even though they are better at all of this, all they can do is kind of weaken him and slowly start taking like chunks out. And like the damage does accumulate on both sides, where by the time you're at that last encounter, the Geagring has like half of its fuck basically destroyed at that point. The Gurdan Gadan has its whole tower has been ripped off. One of the like wings is gone. And the whole like military objective is we gotta keep these two forces from joining together, right? Like the whole military objective for that whole stretch of the show, and again, it still is repetitive, but I think these are the things that still worked for me, was this like we're trying to keep Bishop from being able to get with Drake. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, textually in the show, they can't really use Drake yet, because as soon as Drake enters the fray, it basically has to be the final battle. Because if Bishop in good condition and Drake join forces, they don't stand a chance and they will lose immediately. And so they're desperately trying to just take out this one dude, and they just can't quite do it. And it is killing all of them. Sheila almost dies, and she's in like bed rest for like a whole stretch of episodes. Ella is like expending her aura power and is like trapped in her room for long stretches. Sho has passed out multiple times in the Bilbine and is clearly like, Cham thinks he's died at certain points because he's just spending so much of himself. And so while I do think there's too much repetition, I do think there is still a very like and clearly effective, for me, narrative intent of showing the desperation and dramatizing the Sisyphean task that they are faced with, that ultimately ends with this tragic conclusion of, we just have to wipe it all out. Like, even at the expense of our own lives, it all has to just go, and we have to kind of show the world and teach the broader world that once you've started on this path, it will just lead to destruction, as, you know, in that Cold War kind of way.
Yeah, I just don't feel it. And I think, honest, it's a couple of things. I think the bottom line is it's to quote Bilbo Baggins, it is butter spread over too much bread. It's too thin. It's because the exact dynamics you're describing, Sean, that's the movie Idion Be Invoked. That is the like
right.
Fighting this horrific war. But that is a 90-minute movie that is allowed to, in every minute of that movie, dynamics are shifting and changing, and it's spread out over those 90 minutes. When you take that idea and do it over like a full core of anime. And I think the other thing is that, like, the status quo only ever meaningfully changes in the last 2 episodes. It is not a war of attrition, it is a war of stasis. Like, yes, the characters are feeling more haggard, but we're not like losing people. We haven't spread those deaths out over a longer period. The only character who, like, death gets to register outside of those last 2 is Todd, because he gets his own episode as the fourth to last episode. And I think a lot of this could have worked better if you spread out some of those deaths. Like, you know, Idion Be Invoked does not have everyone die in the last 5 minutes. It's this overall, like, thing over those 90 minutes. And I just think when you're doing this over 12, 13 episodes, it's not just that it's too many episodes, it's that I think it is like a fundamental, like, mismatch between style and substance of like what story they're telling and the medium in which they are telling it across. And it's the lack of evolving dynamics where you will have, like, one thing that kept happening to me is you would have episodes that like are really good in a vault or in a vacuum. That like, I think the way they build up the military tactics and everything, and they build up this head of steam, and the action is well done and the animation is on point, and you would often have that. But then you would hit a wall of, but nothing can actually happen in this episode. And so whatever has to happen in the last like 3 or 4 minutes so that everything can go back to status quo would feel very contrived. I often wouldn't even fully understand why people stopped fighting. It's like, it's this point in the episode, we have to like break off now and regroup. And it would just be this constant deflation. And I think that is something you can get away with a couple of times to do that Sisyphean thing you're talking about, Sean. But it honestly, at a certain point, feels like we've now turned Aura Battler Dunbine into more of a Daitarn 3 style show of it's the same story every episode that just resets, but instead of it being a fun action comedy, it's this like heavy drama. And it honestly bothered me a lot more than Zabungle did, because Zabungle wasn't starting as this high stakes human drama with these like deep political like resonances. And so if Zabungle becomes more of an episodic repetitive thing, it's less of a fall for my enjoyment of it than what happens to Dunbine in this stretch. And that was like my experience with it.
Yeah, the what happened with Zabungle bothered me a lot more with that show, where I think it took kind of like the things that I enjoyed and it lost them. Where here, again, I think part of it is there is something about the kind of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, because that is also the story of Romance of the Three Kingdoms in many ways. Like, it's specifically, I'm thinking of the Zhuge Liang section, where it is him fighting this long battle of attrition that ultimately culminates in achieving nothing. Like, he can't beat Cao Cao's army. There's just no way to really do it. And that ends up going to a different direction because it's also just the ravages of time. But but I do think there is something specific here about this, like, there in so many ways we are better, and we've got like the better cause, we have the better tactics, we have the better warriors. We just don't have the extra piece we need, the wealth, the amount of like warriors and all that kind of stuff, the resources to sort of finish this. And we're trying to accomplish a pretty straightforward objective, and at the last minute, there's always something that we just can't quite finish it. There's something about that drama, and again, the cost, the deterioration you see in the main characters to drive them to the point of where they are on a complete suicide mission, and that is like the thing that they are resorting to do, that everyone is going into those last couple of episodes expecting we are going to give our lives and throw our lives at this problem because it's the only thing we can think to give in order to win this. I don't know. There's something about it that really resonated me, even when I definitely think there are too many episodes where it happens. Like, I do think it is spread too thin, and I think there are specific characters like the Black Knight who end up really kind of flanderized by the way in which they're repeated. But I think the drama of what happens with our main characters, accompanied with the kind of like just the simple pleasure of watching the action unfold in the way that those dynamics are designed and the way that they play out, which I think is really well done. I don't know. I found it both very entertaining, but it also found it emotionally affecting for me.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to put this in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms terms, I guess my problem is they're not fighting Cao Cao, military genius, political like icon. They're fighting Bishot.
Oh, Zhuge Liang is not fighting Cao Cao either. He's fighting mostly some fucking dopes, and he just can't get over it. Like, again, okay, I think it's actually an intentional reference. In the same way that the first part of the show is very much modeled after certain kind of Sengoku style dramas. Like, I do think that there is an intentional, the way that they position some of the stuff with Sheila and Ella, like, I think there is an intentional, we are pulling from this kind of structure from Romance of the Three Kingdoms in order to try to dramatize this.
Well, you do know more about that than me, so I won't like try to speak to that. It's just dramaturgically, I just, because the explanation is just, the barrier is that good. I also do not understand the mechanics. The aura power stuff, this is another thought I had while watching this stretch, is I started to see the reason why Tomino is going to have to go back to Gundam eventually, because I think with the aura power stuff in this stretch, I think he is reaching the limits of how much he can do with evolving the new type concept through other terminologies. And I think you see that here, where like, I think this show, to me, really loses the plot on what the aura power is, what it's doing, how it works, it becomes real gobbledygook to me in a way that I'm thinking back on Zeta Gundam and how it will take the new type concept to the next level in a very not gobbledygook way to me. And I think that's part of it, is just, it's like, I just fundamentally do not understand the mechanics in a lot of these episodes of how the Geagring survives. And if the answer is just, it's that big and has that much aura shield, blah, 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 I'm checking out. I don't give a fuck. I can't understand it, and I don't care, and I don't know why the characters care. It's like, it gets to the point of, like, the book, The Myth of Sisyphus, where you're asking, like, why don't you just fucking kill yourself? Like, there's no point to this. And I guess you can say that's dramatically the point, and that's fine. I just don't want to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, I definitely think that it could be more effective. I mean, because the aura stuff, I think, is definitely like hard to sort of exactly define, because it's not quite like, it's almost like feels more akin to the Force, you know, where it's less about like how much aura power does an individual have, and it's this sort of ever-present energy that is suppressed when you're in Byston Well, and then when they all manifest in Upper Earth, it is this thing where, partially because I guess it's like there's a density in the atmosphere in Byston Well, which is why they're like bombs or whatever are not supposed to do as much damage. And when they come to Upper Earth, this aura power is not meant to be here. It's not meant to be manifest in the world we exist. It's meant to exist in this sort of spiritual dimension. And so any presence of it at all is basically to the people of Earth, it is impassable, right? So we see one thing I do think is like just kind of wild about the stretch of the show is they're just fucking chucking nukes left, right, and center, and it just can't do anything, right? That these kind of Earth weapons, not having something that has this sort of magical aura power, is just can't do anything. These things are completely impervious. The most damaging thing the nuclear weapons do is that they're blindingly bright, which is like an interesting detail that they specifically focus in on every time the nukes are used. They, like there's the first time it's happened, there's concern for like Marvel if she's been blinded by it or not. And it's kind of the constant use of it. And so there's this sense of, with the people of Byston Well coming into our world, that it is the sort of like the tensions of the Cold War having erupted into this monstrous thing, this thing that like we've stockpiled all of our weapons, we have all this shit that can destroy all the Earth, but the one thing it can't destroy is this spiritual like malice or anger or whatever it is that has been brewing subconsciously within all of us. And that these weapons can't touch that shit. That this is again, you're dealing with like issues of the soul, not the issues of the material world. And so our weapons just cannot affect that. And the only thing that does are these like suicide style tactics where they're ramming their planes into them and shit like that, where they go literally kamikaze, and using that terminology. And so, yeah, like, again, like, I think it's sort of a strange, and certainly could be a little bit more kind of like better defined. But it never particularly bothered me over much.
Yeah. Then I also get into the stuff of like, so I guess the kamikaze attacks work because both ships have aura power, and but like, then you also have the episode, it's episode 46, where I really liked this point where the Navy fighters do their pseudo kamikaze attacks where they remote control the planes and they blow up. But why are those able to get in and do stuff when the nuclear bombs weren't able to? It's a little Calvin ball, and I don't need it to be like 100% consistent. But so it's the main thing you have to hang on to at this point, because there isn't anything else happening. This is what the story is. So that's where I just get a little like, I'm stumbling over it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, some of it also feels like he's just kind of borrowing the logic of Dune in the shields in Dune, right? Like that, like the slower moving or whatever, that like it is not registering it as a weapon, and so the aura barrier doesn't respond to it as a weapon. Yeah. I don't know, it just sort of feels to me like that kind of it. It did, like, I'm sure if like you're trying to like logically break it down, it's hard for it to make sense, but it didn't really bother me, partially because I don't know, there's that kind of spiritual connotation to how this is working, and so the technical details of it didn't bother me all that much.
I guess, but the technical details are kind of at a certain point all I feel like I have to hang on to, because again, we're in this state of stasis. We've seen so many things fail to blow it up. Then something is able to, but it feels like when we finally start destroying the gag ring, it's not because characters have made choices. It's because we're in episode like 47, 48. And it's effectively what, like Bell tells us in the final episode of like, why is it working now? It's because it's the finale. And like that logic feels a little too like present in it to me.
Well, I think part of it is also this sense of that the people of Upper Earth are now, instead of just sort of like sitting back and just like fucking fire all the missiles, like they're joining with our characters, right? Like they're forming a like united front against these enemies, rather than it being like a clearly distinct faction, right? That they're sort of like sitting out and seeing how this plays out, maybe like a minor political treaty with Queen Elizabeth II. By the time you're into that kind of last 5 or 6 episodes, you now have this united army between the Gudan and then this kind of ragtag band of these rejects from the United States Navy that have come together, and the members of the European army have all created like a united force to fight the Gagarin.
Yeah. Here's another issue I had going into the ending. This felt to me a little reminiscent of like some stuff near the end of like Gundam Seed Destiny, of the show having an episode that kind of killed the momentum right near the home stretch for me. Is episode 47, I think, is a really bad episode. That is the one where you have Rimuru escapes in the previous, because 46 is the Beyond the Todd, Great episode. 47, in 46, Rimuru escapes while the Geigring, this is the biggest, like, blow they've dealt to the Geigring so far. And that's when that one, like, because it's like got that X shape and one of the X's, like, falls off. And so that's when Rimuru escapes. She's recaptured by Drake because, of course, she fucking is. She's a ping pong ball. And that is where you have, this is the episode called Drake Luza, where he is, like, reacting to realizing how deep, or Drake Luft, sorry. This is where he realizes how deep Luza is in with B-Shot. But then this one also does a couple things that, like, baffled me. You have an entire scene where Ni uses the Zalana in a ramming attack on the Spriggan that gets diverted. It's mostly this, like, filler in the middle of the episode that I don't get why they do that here, because that is how Ni will die in the, like, following episode, is doing this. And so, like, there's this weird preview of it, but that ends with, again, nobody dying, nobody getting hurt. The Zalana, I guess, gets destroyed there, but I don't really care. So you've got that. The animation is really off in this one. Rimmel is, like, really off model in most of the shots when she's on the ship. And she's like, the logic of why she's going back to B-Shot, I don't think is, like, I think it's done better in the following episode when we get a fuller version of all of this. But it's one of those that just kind of, it's another one that just feels like we're holding back on having things happen because we're waiting for episodes 48 and 49. And it's this kind of momentum killer where even when stuff picks up in 48 and 49, I feel at a remove from it because I don't feel like we've revved up into it so much as we've halted, now we're allowed to go.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that one has those severe animation issues. And the whole thing with the Zelana, it's not that it's trying to do a ramming attack, it's that it's trying to come down from the top and then Shot sees it and he, like, doesn't fall for the diversion tactic that Show and Marvel are trying to bring their attention to them, and he doesn't fall for that, and so he's able to sink the Zelana. They weren't trying to do a suicide run on it. Like, not to say that I don't think that like, scene is amazing or anything. I definitely agree that it felt like that was a scene where either Ni or Keen needed to die. And both of them end up surviving. And I think it would have been a better, particularly like Keen. I just think, like, because I like Ni killing Drake. I like the sort of pettiness.
I like that too.
Like, this sort of, like, the guy that he barely even considers to be worth thinking about is killed. So I think, like, that's a good way to use Ni. Keen probably should have died in that scene. I do like all the Drake stuff, though, in that episode. Like, I like the, that, again, he has been, because the thing he's been doing this whole time is just, I'm just going to fucking hang out in America and consolidate my forces and let these people kind of fight it out. And then once I'm ready, I'll go out and basically just kind of sweep up. And he's been using Bishop as a pawn. And then he realizes that Luza has been with him, and Luza has been with him for, like, the whole show. Like, this is another thing where I do have the benefit of having played the Super Robot Wars stuff, so I know a little bit more of this. That whole Bishop and Luza thing is set up in the first episode, because Bishop is the guy who's there admiring the armory where all the Aura Battlers are when Show is being shown around, and Luza is, like, is a bit overly affectionate with him. And so it's clear that, like, the whole thing is she's been sleeping with this guy as a way for her to manipulate him, because he's much easier to manipulate than Drake is. And so when Rimuru tells him, Drake sort of fully realizes, like, oh, I've been kind of had, right? And his pride has been wounded. And so that's where he's now sending Bishop off to basically get killed as part of this vanguard. And arguably the whole reason why he even loses is because he's not actually working with him and Shot. He is trying to use them as distractions to die. And so the whole way the final battle plays out is very similar to the zombies in Mobile Suit Gundam. It is the lack of trust in the sort of backstabbing pit of vipers sort of attitude amongst all the villains is the thing that creates all the openings that allow our heroes to win in the end.
Yeah. But, like, in Gundam, you haven't had, like, I don't know, Kycelia escape 45 times from our heroes, throwing everything they have at her, so I don't feel the same frustration with it. So, yeah. No, I get that. All right. We have the final two episodes where everyone dies. But I think we got to talk about the episode where the best character dies. We got to go beyond the Todd, Sean.
Yes. Let us go beyond the Todd. More than peace, more than justice, more than righteousness, whatever the lyrics of Beyond the Time are. It's like we need to go beyond the Todd.
One funny thing in this show has several episode titles.
Yes.
that Tomino would directly reuse around Char's counterattack. So obviously beyond the Todd, which, just to be clear, it is not like some Japanese phrase that we are translating.
No.
It is in English, Beyond the Todd in katakana. That is the title of it. Just as the song Beyond the Time is, it has a longer Japanese title, but it is, Beyond the Time. Then you have an episode early in the show called Burn's Counterattack, which is grammatically set up the exact same way Char's counterattack is. You also have the episode Garalia's Flash, which is Senko no Garalia, which is the exact Senko no Hathaway's Flash. I think it's kind of funny how many titles of Dunbine become Gundam titles in and around the Char's counterattack stuff.
Yes, but the greatest and the most inexplicable by far is Beyond the Todd. I don't know what the intention is there. I don't know what Tomino thinks that means or is meant to imply. I mean, truly, it's so inconceivable to me what that's meant to imply. But it's because in Beyond the Time, the song, well, the English grammar of it is a little bit awkward feeling. The phrase Beyond the Time means something because it's the new type shit, and we're seeing the tears of time, and it's about we're meeting in these repeating cycles beyond the framework of time, the image of the Mobius loop and all that kind of stuff. Here, I have no idea what Beyond the Todd is supposed to mean, other than it's the greatest collection of 3 words in the English language I've ever heard.
Absolutely it is. Is it Sean, is it a great anime episode title or the greatest anime episode title?
Oh, it's
that is
the greatest.
Question.
It's the top, it's the best there's ever been and ever will be. You cannot get better than Beyond the Todd. It's incredible.
So good. And this is where not only does Todd die in a fantastic scene that I think is the most direct precursor to Char's counterattack that we've seen, not just because of the light show and the way he holds his head back and disappears into the green light, but also that his last word is mama. Where, we're going to go there with Char Aznable too. I mean, but it's the same thing. She could have been a mother to me, literally mama, same kind of stuff. But also I love, there's some great character details here where we get insight on, I mean, for one, Todd, his entire arc from when he is revived by the Garoran guy in Byston Well in the 20s stretch. From then on, you realize that Todd is a much deeper, more thoughtful, smarter person than you realized. He is this guy who presented as such a putz in the early going around and calling Sho the Jap and being, really cocky in his mobile suit and then fucking dying, just losing to Sho horribly every time. All of that stuff. And he turns out to be a much more substantive person, fighter, much more willing to learn from his mistakes. He becomes the character Burn Bunnings seems destined to become, to the point that he has the trust of Drake Luft in a way that nobody else does. In terms of he has the respect of Drake in a way that is really profound. And you learn here that his explicit goal in working with Drake is to ensure that Boston, and by, extension his mother, will not be destroyed. That he is basically buying, Boston will be off the map as a place that we will bomb because I'm working with Drake. And Drake hasn't realized that is what Todd is doing. He thinks Todd is this super loyal foot soldier, and Todd has really kind of subtly been manipulating Drake, keeping not just Boston, but other parts of America out of the path of destruction and getting them out of there. And the fact that Todd is one of the only people in this show who kind of gets one over on Drake Luft is awesome, and reveals what an interesting character he is.
Yeah, and I think, we compared Todd to Jared from Zeta Gundam last time, but obviously their 2 story arcs end up going very different ways, where Todd gains, sort of a level of self-awareness that Jared in Zeta Gundam never gets to. Jared continues to be gassed up by the people around him so much, he never really gets perspective on the kind of person he is. And I think when Todd gets knocked out of the action in the first half of the show, and he has this kind of near-death experience, it really humbles him. And so when he comes back and he's in the Virus and he's working with Bishop, right? This is the point where Bishop in the series becomes a more active character rather than a couple little cameo appearances he has in the first few episodes. And Todd's clearly now thinking about like the larger political scenario. He's kind of thinking about his position between Bishop and Drake and how he can use that to his advantage. He's a much more effective fighter. He's thinking about his fighting and tactics. Like when he shows up in episode 44, Grand Attack, he has developed this strategy where 3 of the Drumlows come together and kind of combine their aura shot into one big one that Sheila's forces just can't defend against, and they just get started fucking chewed up. It's one of the places where it becomes clear how ineffective Bishop is as a commander, that Todd, under orders of Drake, comes in immediately and he starts doing so much better than Bishop's forces ever could do, because Todd has like thought about this. He's curious about it. He's like really working hard. And as I say, he has this like goal that is, a self-centered goal. He's trying to protect the people around him and the country he cares about and stuff. He's not like Sho has this kind of big picture, like I need to kind of save the world kind of thing. Todd is much more of a pragmatist in many ways. He's like, I could accept Drake being the overlord of America if it means that like the people around me and these couple of things I care about are fine. And that's sort of like the path he's chosen.
But that choice is also easier for Sho to make because his parents were pieces of shit.
Yes.
Right? Like, Sho comes from this, like, broken home and had no love as a child. And, like, Todd actually has something he thinks he could lose. Like, that's also, I think, one of the interesting dynamics there, right?
Yes. And yeah, so it's such a fascinating kind of character arc for him to start as this absolute putz and to end up as this, like, charismatic leader of this kind of like, squadron who is one of the few people in the show who is really has a good head on his shoulders about the kind of vision he has for what he wants and how he can get it. And most people are very much struggling to figure out how to do that, partially because Todd has set his goals as something that's much more achievable and that feels kind of appropriate. But he has like a bunch of really great little interactions at this stretch of the show, again, that I think kind of really show you the level of kind of self-awareness and self-introspection he's done. And in episode 44, when he comes back in and he's fighting against Marvel, there's this great little interaction where Marvel yells at him, "Why do we Americans have to hate each other?" And he replies, "I wouldn't expect some hick from the West to understand the struggles of a loser from the East." And his like that's how he sees himself. Like he understands he's kind of washed up. He never was able to be successful at the military academy. There's the sense of that if Tomino understands enough about America to understand the implication of this, that there's a sense of like Todd is from some probably older, wealthier family, and he's not being able to live up to these expectations. We never see his father, but I feel like there's a lot of unspoken dad shit that Todd has that he's not been able to live up. I bet his father's supposed to be like a military guy, and Todd has never been able to live up to the expectations his dad has, but he has so much love for his mother that that's the person he's trying to protect. And that's like the last word he has is mama. And it's like he just becomes such a sympathetic person so quickly. It's just such a fascinating, perfectly done character arc.
The other thing is that, again, they're very purposeful in when they use him, and he is allowed to meaningfully challenge Sho in the back half of the series. You don't have a scene with Todd, like with the Black Knight we get, 50 times, of he comes in, Sho just kicks his ass, and then he miraculously survives an explosion and is somehow given another mobile suit to go try again. And you don't have any of that. It feels like when they fight, one, Sho always is struggling. Like, Todd is a real challenge for him to overcome. And when either like he truly beats Todd and Todd has to go find another way around this, it feels like that's earned in some way. Or when like they fight to a draw and have to leave, it feels like the military tactics around that are well considered. So there isn't that sense of exhaustion when we get to the end with him here. And then I also think we've had a couple of these now with Gerald went hyper and became the big, giant, and Sho did in a certain sense. And then now we have it with Todd, and I think the sequence where Todd goes hyper and becomes, absolutely ginormous, and then Sho basically has to do like Kid Goku flying through like a Demon King Piccolo's chest, like to kill him. That scene is so good. It's, I think, the other best animated scene in this show is Hyper Todd. The way they depict the size of his Aura Battler in that scene, the way his hand is like 10 times bigger than any other Aura Battler on the field, the way, Sho has to fly through him, all of the like aura energy around him, which absolutely is a dry run for the last scene of Char's counterattack, all of that stuff. It's so cinematic. It's so beautifully done. It's just on a production level a cut above what is generally a very like handsome show and well-mounted production. This is just on another level.
Yeah, and one thing I have to say that, I came in pre-armed with lots of information from Super Robot Wars that probably colored some of the way I see the show and what places I enjoyed it and stuff. But one place that really shocked me is the fucking hyper shit, because that's not how it's portrayed in Super Robot Wars, probably for just practical reasons. But in Super Robot Wars, there's a lot of concern about people going hyper, but it's more treated in that game like you're basically just going Super Saiyan and you've got a lot of power and you just like, your aura slashes are incredibly powerful. And, you have a move that you have, which is the hyper aura slash, where Cham goes hyper origiri da, and you cut a dude in half and they explode, and it's cool. There's no, they turn into fucking Godzilla shit. Even though ironically, you do fight Godzilla in that game, so it would have been helpful if he turned into a giant monster to fight them. But when fucking Gerald goes hyper and her Aura Battler just turns into a giant monster, I was so fucking shocked at that happening. And it's great. And I do love just the kind of, it's that and the nuclear weapon shit. I just kind of love some of the maximalist shit that happens in the stretch of the show where it just goes fucking bonkers. And again, it's like the fucking, it's the suppressed id of people living in the Cold War just made manifest of nuclear bombs are going off left, right, and center. And we've created weapons that are turning into literal giant monsters that are going to crush us. Is fucking crazy. And yeah, in here, it's the best version of it. It's so, just the visuals and how it's portrayed is incredible. And then you get this very evocative final exchange where Todd is dying and he says to Sho, basically says like, thank you for letting me have a good dream or see a beautiful dream, however you want to translate it. And then Sho has this very interesting response, one that's very hard to translate into English, but he says basically like, as if I could let this be a good dream. And then Todd whispers mama and he fades away. And the sense of like Todd, a man who never was able to live up to the expectations he set for himself and probably a lot of people had for him, finally at the end being able to prove himself as this great warrior, even if he's fighting for an absolute despot, getting to live in some ways the life that he wanted to have and this kind of heroic death he always wanted to have. And that's anathema to everything that Sho is trying to achieve. It's such a potent little, very juicy exchange to be the final exchange. Again, very much like echoing the kind of thing that Tomino would do at the end of Char's counterattack with like Lala is a woman who could have been like a mother to me, and Amuro responding, what? And then they both explode. And this just sense of everything in their relationship is defined in this one weird kind of esoteric exchange they have moments before, well, at least in this case, Todd dies. Sho lives to fight another day. But yeah, it is an amazing sequence.
I agree with all of that. One minor, correction I'll make is that you said, he's finally getting to be this great soldier, even if he has to fight for a complete despot. Remember, if he had been a good soldier, he would have been fighting for President Ronald Reagan, probably having to go, beat up gangs in Nicaragua or something. So it's not that big a difference.
Well, to be fair, while the Queen of England feels like she is drawn to resemble Elizabeth II,
you're right.
It's clearly not Ronald Reagan. It's
Abe Lincoln with a blue beard. Yeah.
Yes, it's like 70-year-old Abraham Lincoln or something. It's like if Abraham Lincoln lived to be older than he ever was and had white hair. I love that it's a totally nondescript historical 19th century ass looking American president. But it's very clear. And also the Soviets look like they're meant to look like the Soviets, and Elizabeth II is meant to look like Elizabeth II. And then the president looks like he's out of a fucking century ago. Okay, so that's very funny.
This is a good point. Maybe this is an alternate timeline where a lot of stuff went differently, and it's not Ronald Reagan. It is a much more benign figure who has a blue beard and looks like Abe Lincoln.
Yes, it's Abraham Lincoln's great-great-great-grandson. That's too many greats, but still.
One of Abe Lincoln's descendants lived into the, I think, mid-20th century. I don't know if they were alive by the 1980s, but, who knows? Maybe alternate history, they had a kid, and that kid is the president in the 1980s, and then the 2000s are very different.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, man. Now I really wish we could live in the world of Aura Battler Dunbine, kind of. How many Earth people die in this Yeah.
Like millions of people die. Paris is fucking burned completely to the ground. London doesn't get as bad as that, but gets it pretty fucking bad. Big stretches of Eastern Europe are probably just doused in fucking nuclear radiation. It's not a pretty picture. Luckily, America, because Drake seemingly was able to sort of subjugate America more or less non-violently, I guess we would probably have been relatively okay.
So we would have been even more of a superpower going into the 1990s and 2000s because everyone else is destroyed and we kind of lost nothing because even our military stood up for what was right and just and kind of just fought the good fight. So they're all still around. The alternate history here is fascinating because when we get back to Upper Earth in episode 32, we get a specific citation of the number of deaths from the Tokyo incident, and they say over 1 million people died. So if over 1 million people died from just the Goralia show conflict, you're talking World War I and II combined numbers I have to be imagining in the world of Aura Battler Dunbine. It's got to be pretty bleak.
But not if we're in America. We're fine. America came out unscathed. I think China seems like it was probably pretty fine, unless there was some other conflicts we didn't see.
And Japan, I think, wasn't involved in the second round of fighting, so they just had the one thing to deal with. Yeah, so who knows? This is dark. This is dark to contemplate. Speaking of dark, the final 2 episodes.
Yep, kill him all, Tomino. He's like, I gotta earn my fucking stripes, man. It's it's been a bit since I killed them all. He's on the cycle of he kills them all, he doesn't kill them all, he kills them all. It's the time the fucking Wheel of Fortune has spun back around. Sorry, everybody.
We have watched so far, Sean, 6 shows on this season, and of them, 3 end with virtually every named character dead. Zambot 3, Idion, and now Dunbine. The Dunbine one feels bleakest to me, I have to say. It feels like the one that is... Because the thing about Idion, and I've had to, because I think I've told the story of my brother walked into the room while I was watching Idion be invoked just in time to see the little kid get his head blown off with the rocket launcher. And it was that's got to be the most depressing thing you've ever seen, right? I'm actually, it's kind of an uplifting ending. And that sounds insane when you just know the image of, little Ashura getting his head blown off. But the ending of Idion is philosophically, it is about these people caught in this horrific conflict finally being freed in this spiritual sense. And there's this idea that, okay, our world was fallen, but maybe in the next world we create, there is something greater. And so it is kind of on the more hopeful end of things there, in the same way that there are other, Iron-Blooded Orphans doesn't actually feel like the darkest Gundam ending. Even though it has the most people dying, it also has this idea that, the deaths mattered and meant something and, we'll build a better tomorrow off of them. Versus Dunbine is this sense that, for a lot of the show, I think the characters think they can accomplish something and live to see tomorrow, and ultimately conclude that they cannot, and the only solution is to all die in one giant blaze of glory. And there is something really brutal about that lingers in a different way than the Idion version of this ending. Yeah,
it feels like it's a ending about this becoming a warning for a world on the brink of destruction, right? That it's this scenario has been cleaned up, right? Jacoba Aun got all the fucking ore machines out of Byston Well, which obviously is this sort of essential thing as part of human existence in this world, is this place where our souls go when we die and are purified and we come back to Upper Earth. And so she got all that shit out of there, and then we had to deal with it. And we blew it all up, and everyone involved basically was killed. Millions of people across Earth are dead. And as this kind of and then Cham is left to tell the story as and this is at least a more hopeful version of this than if it was that kind of thing from his original outline where he said, and everyone looked at her like some sort of monster and didn't listen. At least here, it feels like everyone comes, again, they witness this miracle, very similar to me in some ways to the Axis shock from the end of Char's counterattack, with this like brilliant light that consumes everything. Everyone kind of watches it happen and comes together, and they listen to the story as told by Cham Fao, the Mi Ferrario, and then she disappears, maybe to go back to Byston Well, who knows? And the sense of like, we need to make sure that we learn from this to untangle ourselves from the resentment and the malice and the technological industry that has caused all of this. I mean, one thing that's very interesting about the show that we haven't talked about is the fact that like fake IBN in the show is like intricately wrapped up in the conflict, and there are like top level people from quote unquote IBN on each side hooking them into like satellites and shit, and they basically saw this as a proxy war for them to profit off of, and then eventually started to realize like, oh fuck, this is like a much bigger thing and everyone's going to die and we probably need to not do this anymore. But like the technical, the like military industrial industry is like very literally brought very deeply into the text of this show as a fundamental part of the problem of this whole conflict. And so it feels like, again, like this, what has happened here is this warning for all of us to not follow down the footsteps of what has happened post World War II that has led us to this point, that has corrupted and driven a rift in our society, both in a literal way, but also in a spiritual way.
Yeah. And one of the threads I really do like in this last stretch, even when I'm not enjoying some other things, is you have the American aircraft carrier, the Carl Vinson, that becomes one of the main like allies to the Sela faction. And it's led by Captain Scott, who is one of the many Norio Wakamoto characters in the second half of this show, who we basically realize is the narrator at the end of the show. Is Captain Scott is the one who like was told this story and then is relating it, because he's the head of that aircraft carrier that goes and gets Cham in the last scene. So I like that there's that little bit of like just continuity of this. That is the group of Earth characters who are kind of our stand-ins for all the other Earth characters, right? And I like that little group. These last two episodes are interesting. I think I have complicated reactions to them. Like, part of me does wish some of the action was spread out over a little bit of a longer period. Like, I think I wish we got to linger with the ending with Cham and what we're told and some of that just a little bit longer, because I really like that as like a final note for the series. But then it's just really, really tough for me to disentangle this with the ending of Ideon in my head, in part because I do think like Ideon Be Invoked is one of Tomino's, absolute Mount Rushmore moments in anime history. Incredible. And I think this is often very good. It's well staged. It does feel a little too repetitive of that. And I'm just a little too disconnected from the characters to care as much as I wish I did at the end here. I think Marvel's death is the one that lands hardest, but it's also moving so fast that we never get a scene where Sho gets to react to that, for instance. So I'm kind of two minds about these last two episodes. I think on one level they are very impressive and they are very ruthless, but I had a more muted reaction than I think I thought I would if you told me at the beginning that this was going to end with a everybody dies ending.
Yeah, I mean, I did explicitly know that this was going to end with an everybody die ending. So even though that does not happen in Super Robot Wars Y, but I basically knew that everyone was going to fucking die.
I did not. Again, to be clear, this was like a surprise to me as we started going. It's in episode 48 when you have L, Rimuru, and Luza all die like in a row. I'm like, oh, okay, we're going. If you kill all of them, you're going to kill everyone. So, yeah. Yeah,
so it's something that I basically knew was going to happen. But I did find it very effective. I do think, I think he finds, very good places for everyone to die. The main one, because I think Keen should have died, 2 episodes earlier as, this is where we're going. And I think it would have, added more to the drama coming in. But I tend to like how he kind of pairs people up, that Show and Marvel take out Shot and Musi together. And again, I like the one thing I like is just the dysfunction on the antagonist side, that they have all turned on each other one way or another, and that is the thing that spells their destruction. I love that fucking Knee, because I kept on wondering what was going to happen with Knee, because he's just not all that much of a character at a certain point. Like, Sela and Elle just so eat his lunch as being like the leaders. But there is something I think very potent about Drake's final moment being like, Knee given, like it's you, and then he just gets fucking killed. As it's like, I love that Drake gets taken out by, he's not a nobody, but he's not. I think Drake wanted to get killed by Sheila Lapana or Shozama or Marvel Frozen or one of like the great warriors on the other side, and he's taken out by the guy who, he at the opening phases of this whole conflict killed his whole family, and he has been living with that grudge the entire time. Yeah, and I think, like, on one hand, it would be nice to have a little slower stuff to see Show react to Marvel's death, but I also like, in that very Tomino way of, like, the immediacy and urgency of what's happening is, like, Show can't stop to reflect on it. And I love the final moments of, even if the Burn Bunnings Black Knight stuff ends up getting, again, very Flanderized, that final moment of Show jumping from his cockpit, impaling himself on Burn's sword, but driving his sword through him. And specifically, it's the moment of him shouting out to Sheila just the word, like, purify us, like Joka-o, cleanse our souls, basically. And everything explodes, everything erupts. And that's the thing that Show has been driven to this point, that the only thing they can do is basically pray for their souls to be cleansed and to re-enter the cycle of reincarnation. That is, it's very sad, but that is kind of the only place that we can think to go at this point, because we've just not managed to avoid this situation. We just were not good enough, smart enough, strong enough, had enough foresight to be able to long enough ago divert this path, and that they were stuck on this road of mutually assured destruction a long time ago. And he's had to and Show ultimately kind of has to accept it at the end, that this is the only thing that he can really do in this moment.
Yeah. I do, one of my favorite bits of writing in the finale is right before he yells, purify us, when he is about to leap, he yells, I will not kill this person. I will kill the malice inside him. I really like that line. I like that idea. I think this is tough to put to words. I think the missing ingredient for me in the finale, again, I don't know if it needed to be the scene Tomino had described, and apparently they started to animate, of everyone being reborn as Mi Ferrario. I wish we had something in Byston Well. I think one of the things that, if I'm guessing what a lot of people's, and I know one of my, like, maybe sources of discomfort with the Upper Earth arc is that a lot of the fantasy and the spirituality disappears from the show. Now, obviously, that is intentional, because we're on Upper Earth, we're going into this, like, intense Cold War situation. I'm not saying that's a mistake. But I think the absence of it is something that is supposed to be deeply felt. But I also think that when you come back around to the ending, the only way this ending doesn't feel fairly horrifically nihilistic is if you have the spiritual release that, like, ties us back to the beginning of the narrative and everything we learned about Byston Well. And the fact that, I mean, we're told it exists. It is an idea, but it is purely abstracted at this point in the story. It is not something that exists in what we are seeing and being shown, because the last time we glimpsed Byston Well was like 18 episodes ago, and we don't get that, eerie opening narration about Byston Well and, like, the that is the land between the sea and the shore and all of that stuff. That's all gone. And if that is the thing that really attracted you to Dunbine, and it was, like, one of the central things for me, you've missed that for a long time, and you don't get to go back to it in any way, is where it feels just a little bit like there's a missing gesture. And again, I don't need it to be as explicit as we see everybody's souls reborn. It could be as small as cutting back to Byston Well, seeing life go on, maybe like the smallest image of, like, seeing something bloom and something being born, but, like, some idea that, like, the cleansing that they wished for led to something like that. But what you really have is a show that has that fantasy and that spirituality for, like, 2/3, and is then drained and drained and drained until it's all death and destruction. And I can understand how that can be like feel viscerally wrong to a viewer, even if I also understand why it is done that way, and I think there is real artistic intent behind that. It's just, there is that level of discomfort I feel with it, whether that's productive or not, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, like, you know, Tomino himself kind of waffled on that exact sort of like point about like how much do you show or how much do you go back there, because I do think there is something very effective about that all of that is left up to our imagination, that we are put in the perspective of Captain Scott and all the other people, many of whom are like, what the fuck is, you know, because you do get some of these moments with some of like the onlookers in this stretch, because I think there's like a specific scene, I want to say it's in 48, where Captain Scott has his like second in command or someone there, and they have this brief conversation where he's like, what the fuck is this Byston Well shit and this like aura power, and Captain Scott's trying to explain it as best he understands it, but there's like the sense of like, is all this real, like is this kind of fantasy world? And then you get this like really interesting sequence of the very end where, again, everybody assembles. Nobody seems to understand. Like, everyone's confused about why they're there. They're like, oh, we were ordered to be here. But it's like, what? Why are you here? Because it's all the, like, you know, armies of the Cold War, you know, that are, you know, meant to be at opposite sides of each other, all assembling on one spot, seemingly without knowing exactly why they are there. And then they fish Cham out. And I love that, like, it's because you're not just kept at arm's reach out of the like world of Byston Well, but you also don't actually get Cham very directly. You just see her through like a news report, basically, that is Cham Phao, it's the fairy of Cham, that, you know, she has become like a minor celebrity or something since the first time she was in Earth, and like everyone learned that fairies fucking exist. And then you get the narration, and then she just slips away quietly, and we never hear her speak after the events happen. And so there definitely, I think there is it's a kind of chilling ending, but I think there is a very powerful quality to it. You know, not as potent as the ending of Daitarn 3, where Haran Banjo is locked away in his mansion, but it's got a similar kind of feel to it, where it's like you just don't get really to see the thing you really want to see, and you're left to imagine, you know, both Byston Well and Cham herself. Does she go back? Like, is she wandering somewhere in the world to tell someone else the story again? We never really know. And I personally like the ending. Like, I do think that element of it I find very effective.
Yeah, and I don't dislike it. I'm a little torn on it. I do think it is effective in some ways. It's tough to talk about. It's definitely very interesting. It's very bold. It's, you know, he is thoroughly earning that fucking Kill 'Em All moniker. Oh my God. Yeah. It's brutal. What else do we have to talk about with Aura Battler Dunbine? Now I feel like I'm being brought down by this sad ending.
Yeah, there's a few things I want to hit. So there's some character stuff where I do want to shout out Marvel again, because I think she was a great character in the first half. I really love her in the second half of the show as well, where she becomes an even more, once she gets the Dunbine, she becomes a much more active character in the fight sequences, and she like really holds her own. And there are several fights that she's basically the one who wins them, which I really love. And I love Marvel and shows relationship. It's a very interesting character dynamic that's not quite like any other sort of pseudo romance thing we have in another Tomino show, at least that I can think of, where it is this like, there is a clear romantic affection between these two, and sometimes that kind of bubbles up to the surface. There's the one episode near the end where she's asks him like, do you love me? And he kind of waffles a bit and he says, I like you. Like, she uses the Japanese word I, and he says the Japanese word ski, and then, which means to like, and then she swings back on him with no, and the way this is worded in Japanese is a little bit funny, where she says, no, not like, I want love me, where she says the English words love me, not just the English word love, which is a little bit of a, you know, a strange thing, but, you know, they're not native English speakers writing the dialogue. But that sense of, it felt like a little bit of like the cultural difference of where they come from is that discomfort that show has with using the word I to express his feelings, in the sense of like his inability to kind of bridge that gap, but also the sense of like that neither of them are really in a position in their life in order to have that relationship. And there's something very beautiful about this partnership the two of them have, because there's so much love and trust between them, but something so tragic that they can't live in a world where they can really nurture that relationship into something more normal, that it has to be this kind of pseudo lovers, pseudo brothers in arms kind of thing.
No, I completely agree. I really like the Marvel show dynamic. There's some really good stuff near the end where like they both feel like they know they're going out to die, and they don't want to say that directly to each other, but they're also the only two people who feel like they can understand it in one another's presence. There is a lot of rich, like very mature stuff going on with those two characters, and I'm glad you shouted that out.
Yes. One of the other ones I want to shout out is Cham. We talked a little bit about like there's a bit more comic relief. And she gets her like little uniform and stuff. But I think Kawamura Maria, who voices Cham, and remember this was her first role because she was not originally a voice actress. She was a cosplayer turned like interviewer for an anime magazine. That in the interview with Tomino, he suggested that she try out for the character. And she's good in the kind of early stretches of the show, but you can tell that she's not like a professional voice actor yet, that like she hasn't really done this before. By the end of the show, she's so fucking good. Like you can just see how much she has grown as an actress over the course of the thing. And it feels like, I wonder how much of like Cham's bigger role, because she just feels so much more present in the last 20 or so episodes compared to the first section where she felt more like just a mascot character. She ends up becoming like a real central character who's carries a lot like of weight with her. One of the big moments that makes Todd's death land really hard is after he dies, it's Cham floats up to Sho and asks him, is Todd really dead? And Sho just starts crying in response. And then you get a point of view shot basically of Sho from Sho's eyes of him looking at Cham and the explosion in the like silhouetting her in the background. And so it's like Cham is such a cool character. And I do think like that performance just got better and better as it went along. And then I was very, very thrilled when she finally got her little battle uniform, which again is what I expect the character to look like from the game. And it is fucking awesome in the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, then just a couple of actors I want to shout out because we didn't really get to them so much in the first half of the show. So we have Takahashi Miki plays Sheila Lapana, who she was the character Mimiri Midorihara in Shima Shima Tora no Shimajiro, which is a kid's cartoon that has 726 episodes. She was not in a lot of other like big anime we would know, but that was like one of like, oh, she's in hundreds of episodes of this show. And I do really like Sheila. I like her. Again, I like the sort of like bait and switch of she seems like she's this beautiful kind of slightly aloof princess, and then she's like the most cutthroat fucking strategist of anybody on the show, willing to do these like, bait and switch deceit plans that are very risky but have like a high potential return. And there's something about that contrast and how like strong-willed she is, but also she's incredibly smart, I think is a really cool character. Also a character I like a lot from the game, and it was fun to actually see her in the show.
Yeah, again, I think she gets tied up in some of the more repetitive parts of the show that I wasn't crazy about, but I like the character, and I think the instinct that Tomino had, because you talked about this earlier, that role in the story was going to be more of like an old wizard kind of figure. And I think turning it into this like young, magical girl kind of figure who's very different than anyone else on the show, I think is a very effective choice for the ending. And honestly feels like honestly, if there's a Gundam precursor she feels to, it's, I'm blanking on the name, but the female lead of Gundam Seed. The
cat?
Kira's girlfriend.
Lacus Klein?
Lacus Klein, yes. That is the character this reminded me of in terms of like, and I know that is not a Tomino show, but like that feels like the kind of archetype Sheila Lapana exists in. Yeah. Is like a proto kind of Lacus Klein kind of figure.
That's actually a really good point. I had not made that connection, but yes, she absolutely is. I'm sure that this was an influence on that character. 100%. Yeah. One I want to shout out just because of the voice actors in particular. Tomizawa Michie is the voice of Elfino, the pink-haired Mifrario, and she is Rei / Sailor Mars in Sailor Moon. So I just want to shout that out because she's a great actress. Belle, by the way, the other Mifrario, was voiced by Saijo Miki, who was also Garalia in the first half of the show. So she got to stick on, after Garalia died, they brought her back later to be Belle, which is also fun. In terms of other actors we hadn't talked about last time, Bishop Hat is voiced by Sogabe Kazuyuki, who is Android 13 in Dragon Ball Z Super Android 13, Dr. Mew in Dragon Ball GT, and Kunzite, who is a very good kind of B-tier villain in the first season of Sailor Moon. Bishop, not like an amazing character. Like, I do think like they could have pumped him up a little bit more in order to like make, we obviously, again, like there's just too many episodes where he is like the person that we're dealing with. But I think it's a good performance. I think like the character just needed a bit more spice and fewer episodes that he was the main antagonist in.
Yeah.
And then there's two that I want to really talk about here. One, we did talk about him last time, but I didn't realize this guy was going to keep popping up, which is Tachiki Fumihiko as Zet Light, the guy who is Shot Weapon's sort of other guy. And one of my favorite little moments near the end of the show, it's the episode
I know what
where
you're
this guy
talking about,
dies,
yeah.
is you have this conversation between him and the Black Knight, where the Black Knight's like talking all about how amazing Shot Weapon's designs are, and Zet's just like, okay, no, look, Shot's a politician. I'm the guy that designed the computer program for the Aura machines. And it's so, obviously this is not at all what the reference could be, because it's just what's happening. But it's so Steve Jobs versus Steve Wozniak. And it's like, I just immediately, my mind flashed to that Steve Jobs movie with Michael Fassbender as Steve Jobs and Seth Rogen as the Woz. And just being like, just thank the Dunbine team, man. Just thank them. It's the right thing to do. It's like, no, the Dunbine is the only product this company ever made that was successful. It's like, I desperately want that scene rewritten for Zet Light and fucking Shot. Now that we know that Shot's not actually that smart, he's purely just a politician. And it makes so much sense because all he does is manipulate people. And Zet's the dude who's doing all the fucking hard work that actually matters.
To me, Steve Jobs didn't directly claim credit in that way, but yes, yeah. It's. I do like the comparison. I do like imagining Zet Light as Wozniak, and I would absolutely watch Michael Fassbender and Seth Rogen act out a scene where they have absolutely no idea what we're referencing, but we hold them hostage and make them reenact our script about the Dunbine. Yeah, it'd be great.
And then I also want to shout out Wakamoto Norio, who one of the funniest parts of the show when we go to Upper Earth is that every random guy in the world is voiced by Wakamoto Norio. And it's like, at the time, I'm sure that was fine. It does get a little distracting now because he's just such a
so distinctive,
actor.
Yeah.
It's such a clearly distinctive voice that it reminds me a lot of in Victory Gundam. It's Nakata Joji is like one of the guys. She just plays the one-off guy in random episodes all the time. It's like, man, his voice is so distinctive and he's so well known that it's like I just can't ever think anything other than, oh, it's Wakamoto Norio in it again as yet another random dude. And it's not at all the show's fault. It's just like a weird thing looking back on it with hindsight now of how huge his career has become, because this is one of the first shows he was ever in, was Aura Battler Dunbine.
Yeah, and it's because he's the narrator, so he's in the booth every week, but he doesn't have such a big part that it's distracting if he plays smaller parts. Like, Sho can't do this because he's the main character, but if you're the narrator, you can. This is why, like, Joji Yatami in Dragon Ball is everybody. Yes. Then eventually becomes, like, the King Kai, and so he has a few little less of like playing bit parts, but like it's that kind of effect, but with someone who will become one of the most distinctive anime voices of all time.
Yes, and it cracked me up constantly. That's like yet another Wakamoto Norio character. And let's see, there's a couple other things I want to do just for cleanup, because I highlighted it in my notes because I'm like, I know I'm going to forget, because I don't particularly like either of these songs, so I just want to forget it. But we shout out the songs every time. It's like, it feels like, I don't know, wrong for us not to talk about. There are two insert songs that pop up in the second half. The Mizuiro no Kagayaki, or Sky Blue Brilliance, which are composed by Ami Kurakazuya, who did the main themes as well, performed by Koide Hiromi, who's a different singer, but critically not lyrics by Tomino himself.
Wait. You're telling me that Tomino did not write the line, "Sweet Little Dream" from Watercolor? Yes. That we hear over and over in this insert song? I don't know, Sean. I don't know if I can believe you on that one.
Yes. Nor did he write the lyrics for "Ao no Speech Balloon" or "Blue Speech Balloon," which the chorus line of that song is speech balloon, which is a very weird pair of words to use. It's the main chorus line for your song. like these songs are like so unremarkable and don't fit to me at all with the musical tone of
No,
what the
they're
opening
bad.
theme and ending theme are, which I think define what these kinds of songs are, in the way that Hey You, all-time great insert song from Zabungle, fits so well within the musical tone of that show. This, I have no idea what the, like, why these shows or these songs were put in here. I don't know what the production history are. They kind of feel like a production studio being like, we got a new singer, because Koide Hiromi was a very new singer. We got to get some songs in something. And so the recording label got them in there or something. I don't know. They're almost universally used just in the opening narration for some episodes, but they're also not consistently used. It's not like every episode has one.
Sky Blue Brilliance is used in scenes, like where something sad will happen, and then you get "Sweet Little Dream" from Watercolor, and I'm like, what? Where did this come from? What the fuck?
Yeah.
It's I'm not usually down on insert songs because really, frankly, any song when used as an anime insert song becomes better. But these are like so out of step with the rest of the show. It's pretty funny.
Yes. I'm with you. Very rarely do I feel like there's a opening or ending or insert song that's just like straight up kind of bad. These are two that are straight up bad.
Yeah. So not a big problem for the show, but it is kind of funny.
And then the last thing, we don't have to have a big conversation about this, but I gotta at least read my little speech I wrote on the Celtic mythology speech thing, because we kicked it out of last episode because it was too long. And I just want to put together my theory of where Tomino got a lot of his ideas for what Byston Well is, which I think he's pulling largely from the other world from Celtic mythology. This ties into the genre discussion we had last time, where this show is just like a weird mystical animal that is just completely unique. So let me just break down. Here is the connections I see and how I think that Tomino arrived at the isekai storyline, basically by working backwards through common storytelling tropes from Celtic mythology, which obviously resonate throughout Aura Battler Dunbine with like the leprechaun and all that kind of stuff. So the conceptual setting of Byston Well has these roots in Celtic mythology. Nearly every mythological system has some concept of an other world, usually the world one passes into upon death. Byston Well clearly pulls on that mythological tradition, which on its own is arguably the origin of what we would call isekai stories, right? Isekai just has all of its traces back to stories of people traveling to another world, like people walking into Hades in Greek mythology. However, the other world, as it appears in various forms of Celtic mythology, has a clear, specific similarity to elements of Byston Well. Byston Well lies between the sea and the shore and is depicted as being deep underwater, yet not literally beneath the sea. It is also a place tied into the cycle of reincarnation where souls go to rest and be cleansed. The Irish poet W.B. Yeats described the Irish relationship to the other world as, quote, "In Ireland, this world and the world we go to after death are not far apart. Indeed, there are times when the worlds are so near together that it seems as if our earthly chattels were no more than the shadows of things beyond." Shout out to W.B. Yeats. Turns out he's a very good writer. Generally speaking, in Celtic mythology, the soul travels to the other world upon death and is eventually given a new body and appears again in our world. Notably, there is no heaven or hell. This other world is not a place for punishment. It is simply another existence similar to our own. In fact, the dead in the other world lead out an existence which is simply an extension of the life they had before death. A quote from the book on Irish mythology by McCullough says, "The world of the dead was in all respects a replica of this world, but it was happier. In existing Breton and Irish belief, a survival of the older conception of the bodily state of the dead, they resume their tools, crafts, and occupations, and they preserve their old feelings. Hence, when they appear on earth, it is in bodily form and in their customary dress. Like the pagan Gauls, the Breton remembers unpaid debts and cannot rest till they are paid. And in Brittany, Ireland, and the Highlands, the food and clothes given to the poor after a death feed and clothe the dead in the other world." So people in the other world are not ghosts or specters. They are physical beings that live and work and wear clothes and do the things that we do in our world. The other world in Celtic mythology can be found in many forms, some underground, others beyond or under the sea. There are many Celtic stories which are voyage stories, where a hero travels or attempts to travel to the other world. This passage, which is from the Wikipedia page on the Celtic Otherworld, but really is just quoting and kind of summarizing sections from the book, The Dictionary of Celtic Mythology, gives a big picture view of the tropes of these stories, which shows the parallels with Dunbine. Quote, in some tales, the other world is reached by going under the waters of pools, lakes, or the sea, or else by crossing the Western Sea. In Irish Imrama, or voyage tales, a beautiful young otherworld woman often approaches the hero and sings to him of this happy land. Sometimes she offers him an apple or the promise of her love in exchange for his help in battle. He follows her and they journey over the sea together and are seen no more. Sometimes the hero returns after what he believes is a short time, only to find that all his companions are dead and he has actually been away for hundreds of years. Sometimes the hero sets out on a quest and a magic mist descends upon him. He may find himself before an unusual palace and enter to find a warrior or a beautiful woman who makes him welcome. After strange adventures, the hero may return successfully. However, even when the mortal manages to return to his own time and place, he is forever changed by his contact with the other world. And this is what I think is the fundamental basis. I strongly suspect that Tomino was reading books on Celtic mythology and pulled his conception of Byston Well and the idea of the hero being pulled in by this beautiful fairy woman, in this case Silky, and being set upon this task of a great adventure. It just has so many distinct similarities. And I find it very fascinating because Celtic mythology is not a mythological system we often see referenced. We're usually going to Christian mythology. We're usually going to like Greco-Roman mythology, sometimes Norse, sometimes even Egyptian. I feel like Celtic is a fairly rare pull, but I think Dunbine is like very deeply in conversation with this and combining it with like Japanese Shinto Buddhist beliefs with their version of reincarnation. And I think it's just a very fascinating thing that is one of the many ingredients that makes Aura Battler Dunbine such a unique, such a different vision of what fantasy is, since it's pulling from very different source material than what we usually get.
I think you make a very convincing case, Sean, and I'm glad you put that all together for us. But here's my counter argument. What if Tomino was just walking around one day and he saw a well and he said, "What's by that stone well? What's by it?" What if, oh my God, Aura Battler Dunbine. There we go.
Yep, by it, and there was a beetle over by that stone well.
Yeah,
he's like, fuck, beetles, big beetles. Fucking what else has wings? Fairies, little people with wings. Oh my God, it's all here. And that could be it. And he's like, oh, I need to make a new TV show. Fuck, but what do I call the main character? I've got it. TV show, let's go.
All right. What's funny is actually, Sean, I've been playing Dragon Quest VI over the last week. And if you know Dragon Quest VI, that is the one, it's called Realms of Revelation, where you have both the real world and the dream world, and you're crossing between them. And the way you get to the dream world and back is you go through these stone wells. And I've been thinking about that all week since I've been finishing Dunbine and playing that game, is you go to the stone well and you peer in and then you fall into the other world or you come back. And it's clearly pulling from the same kind of idea, obviously, but I love that.
Yes. Aura Battler Dunbine, a strange beast, but one that has
strange beast
made its impression on the industry. Like, whether intentionally or not, it is in its own way a incredibly influential work. But one that obviously went through many trials and tribulations. Again, it's not often that you see a show that outlives its own main sponsor.
Yes,
is not a thing you see every day. But Byston Well and Aura Battler Dunbine, a true miracle of a production here.
And with this, Sean, we are almost done with Season 6, Part 1. We've got one show left to do. And we're going to watch the first 27 episodes of it next time. What are we watching next time, Sean?
Yes, well, next time we are leaving Byston Well behind and we are adventuring into the Pentagona world, because we will be talking all things heavy metal Elgheim. We're going to see a lot of new faces, maybe one familiar face as well. And going to you might have heard this before, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And we're going to see some lightsabers that aren't lightsabers and a lot of other things. We're going to a world that has two suns. You might have heard of it, but it's not Tatooine. And we'll be getting into all of that next time. And we really will be having to soul search ourselves as we go past Aura Battler Dunbine. What do we find in this world where we have gone beyond the Todd?
belong to Todd さよなら言えなくていつまでも抱きしめたただ Todd belongs to you 張り裂けそうになるこの胸を君に差し出して We belong to Todd 遥かな空の下ブロンドに光る少年がある悲しみはそこから始まって愛しさがそこに帰るのさ
ボストンの古代抜け出せなくていくつもの罪を繰り返す
平和より自由より正しさよりどのだけが望むすべてだから離れても変わっても見失っても輝きを消さないで
You can change your destiny
空の向こう
You can change your future
眩しいこと
We can share the darkness
探してゆく今宵会えるその日を夢という風に導かれて過ちの船に揺られて We belong to Todd 生きてゆけるのならいつかまた戻れる日がある
ボストンの古代引き寄せられていくつもの出会い繰り返す Beyond the door
希望より理想より憧れよりどれだけが信じ進んでいた儚くて悲しくて偽りないままじゃ死のうとしないで
You can change your destiny
空の向こう
You can change your future
眩しいこと
We can share the darkness
探してゆく金髪の少